Hello everyone, and welcome to another Paranormal M video. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, please give the video a like. And if you've ever had a strange or unexplained experience of your own, feel free to send it to me. Our first story is about a woman living in rural Tennessee who started hearing someone asking for help in the woods. At first, she thought a person might be in trouble, but her dog's reaction and the strange laugh that followed made her think otherwise. Get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. I hope you have a good night and sleep well. I figured I'd share this here because, honestly, only a few of my friends believe me, and even they seem unsure. I'm hoping someone might recognize what happened or at least help me understand it. I've lived near an old historic trail outside a small Tennessee town since around 2012. For years, nothing unusual ever happened. No strange noises, no shadows, no paranormal experiences at all. Then, one cold night in late October, everything changed. I was letting my dog outside before bed. We usually used the front door because the back porch was being repaired, and the only light out there came from a few dim solar lamps. That night, though, my dog refused to come back inside. He just stood near the driveway, barking toward the woods. We live on several acres, and our nearest neighbors are far enough away that you can't easily hear them. At first, I assumed he had spotted a fox or maybe a coyote. That wasn't unusual. I stepped off the porch and heard something moving through the leaves. My dog lowered his head and started growling. Then, from somewhere inside the woods, I heard a woman scream, "Help! Help me! Please help!" It wasn't the cry of an animal. The words were clear. Someone, or something, was asking for help. I walked a few steps closer and called out, "Who's there?" The voice answered immediately, "Help me!" I started toward the trees, but my dog moved in front of me and blocked my path. That frightened me more than the voice did. He loved people and had never tried to stop me from approaching anyone before. I called out again, "What happened? Are you hurt?" Everything went silent. I ran inside, grabbed a flashlight, and called for my younger cousin, who was staying in the room closest to the back door. He came outside while I stood near the porch, shining the light between the trees. I shouted, "Where are you?" The woman screamed again, "Please help me!" I turned to my cousin and asked, "You heard that, right?" He looked confused. "Heard what?" I asked him how he could possibly miss a woman yelling from the woods, but he swore he hadn't heard anything. I called out one more time. There was no response. My cousin took the dog inside, and the second the door closed behind them, the voice came back. "Help me." That was when something inside me shifted. I didn't believe the voice anymore. I asked, "What's your name?" The answer was a giggle. It didn't sound playful or human. It was low and twisted, almost like something trying to imitate laughter without understanding what laughter was supposed to sound like. Then I heard rapid footsteps moving through the woods. Whatever it was fast. A few seconds later, everything stopped. That was when I noticed the silence. There were no owls, no insects, no frogs, no coyotes. Even the nighttime birds had stopped singing. The entire property felt frozen. I know the sounds of the animals that live around us. We have deer, wild turkeys, raccoons, foxes, coyotes, and even a large wildcat that occasionally passes through the area. I've heard all of them walking and running through those woods. This sounded different. And yes, wildcats can make noises that resemble a woman screaming, but they don't speak in clear sentences. A few weeks later, I let the dogs outside after dark. Once they were back inside, I heard a strange growling sound near the edge of the property. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Two yellow eyes stared back at me from between the trees. I couldn't clearly see the body, but the eyes were much higher than my own. I'm just over 5 feet tall, and whatever was standing there seemed noticeably taller. After that, I began hearing scraping sounds outside my bedroom window at night. It happened again and again. One evening, I finally became frustrated enough to go outside and investigate. I searched the wall, the window frame, and the ground below it. There were no scratches, no footprints, nothing. The sounds continued for months. The final encounter happened when I was unloading groceries from my car late one evening. As I closed the trunk, I saw those same yellow eyes watching me from the woods. By then, I wasn't only afraid, I was angry. No one else in my family seemed to experience any of this. It was always me and the dogs. They would become restless before I even noticed anything was nearby. So I stood beside my car and said, as firmly as I could, that our home and our land were protected in the name of Jesus, and that whatever was watching me had no right to remain there. I blinked. The eyes were gone. Since that night, nothing else has happened. I tried several times to record the scraping sound, but my phone never picked it up. During one of the encounters with the yellow eyes, I attempted to take a picture. My phone suddenly shut off, even though the battery had been above 20%. Some people have suggested creatures from old legends, but most of those stories come from regions far from Tennessee. I don't know what I heard or what I saw. I only know that the voice in the woods sounded human, and I know it wasn't. Hey there. I want to share a story that's a mix of personal history, mystery, and something a little otherworldly. So, I grew up in this old house, one with layers of stories and shadows. My parents still live there now, but before them, it was my grandmother's home. And, sadly, she drank herself to death in that very place. You might think this sounds far-fetched, and I totally get that. But I've got photos and videos that caught things you just can't explain away. I work as a librarian, so I did some digging into the house's past. Turns out, it used to be apartments, and it was the only place hit by a tornado back in the day. There's more. Back in the 40s or 50s, I should check the exact year, a young boy was waiting for the school bus right in our driveway and was tragically hit by a diesel truck. He died there. My parents added a second story and an extension to the back, so I lived upstairs. There's this door in the closet that leads to the attic, and I had dreams about that little boy coming out from there. Strangers who visited have seen him too. I actually got a photo once showing his ghostly figure. Well, at least the top half of him. We even asked him to show himself, and he did. When I was a kid, the hauntings were more of an irritation than anything truly frightening. Things like missing items, footsteps at night, the old TV knobs twisting on their own, changing channels, the radio flipping stations wildly. It felt like the spirits were just messing with us. But sometimes, when my parents talked about moving, the activity would get intense. Shadows would appear, the boy's face would show at the window, belts would swing by themselves in the closet. Visitors outside the family often felt drained, like the house was sucking their energy. You could see bright orbs moving with purpose around us. Sometimes these orbs would come right up to my video camera, pause, and then veer off. I really believe there's more than just the boy's spirit there. My mom even had a visit from my grandmother's ghost once, and I had an experience I can barely explain. A headless black dog, its neck spurting blood, breath hot on my face despite no mouth or nose. I still shudder thinking about it. There was even a moment when I levitated in front of my family. Just recently, while visiting my parents, I took some photos on my phone that turned a strange red color with huge orbs floating in them. For the first time, I tried recording an EVP, an electronic voice phenomenon. I was hesitant because communicating with spirits is terrifying. I asked how the boy died, and the recording sounded like he said, "front yard." I'm hoping someone can help clean up the audio. That's the only evidence I'm comfortable sharing right now. I'm protective of my parents. They're elderly and still live there, so I'm serious about all this. Believe me or not, it doesn't change what I know. Now, let me tell you about something that happened recently, after I moved into a different old house with my boyfriend. It's a 5-bedroom house from 1900, and right from the start, the energy felt off, like a constant low hum of something unsettling. We hear banging noises a lot, and footsteps echo upstairs. We have 4 roommates, and honestly, all of us have at some point left the house because it just felt too eerie or scary. Each room has 2 little doors in the closet. One leads to the attic, and the other opens into the walls. Because the house is so old, it has double walls with insulation, and if you remove those badly nailed doors, you can actually stand up and walk inside the walls. Creepy, right? There's also this attic tunnel that connects our bedroom to a roommate's bedroom. Often, the noises come from places where no one can physically be. I wake up around 2 or 3 in the morning most days feeling scared for no clear reason. But apart from this creeping feeling and the noises, nothing overtly paranormal has happened. Last week, we had a really fierce storm. The energy in the house was heavy, almost suffocating. We were all talking loudly over each other, trying to ignore the tension, when suddenly we heard what sounded exactly like a basketball dribbling upstairs. It was so loud it made us all stop and listen. Then, footsteps came from inside the upstairs wall. Odd because the bedrooms don't stretch that far back. Our roommates had to leave for work, and I practice Wicca, so feeling uneasy, I decided to leave too and gather some items to protect the house from dark energy. Here's the part that still makes me catch my breath. I was back in the house, burning sage, walking through the rooms, asking only positive energy to stay, to please stop scaring us or bringing negativity. On the opposite side of the house, I had some protective crystals set up, jet specifically. My cat was with me, quietly watching. Suddenly, I heard this loud pig-like squeal from the other side of the house, followed by a clatter. I nearly jumped out of my skin because all the crystals, which were resting on a flat surface, had been knocked off the ledge. I thought maybe they fell behind the couch, so I moved it aside to check. There they were, on the floor behind the couch. But on top of them was a blue hydrangea flower, perfectly intact, not a petal missing. Now, I had just cleaned and vacuumed behind the couch that week, and my kitten loves tearing up things back there, jumping on counters, ripping flowers apart. Plus, the hydrangea bush outside had been dead for at least a week. None of my roommates were home or knew I was blessing the house, so they definitely didn't plant it there to mess with me. That side of the house now feels peaceful to me, but the other side, with the creepy tunnel and attic closet, still gives off a dark, heavy vibe. Has anything like this happened to you? Could this flower be some kind of gift from the spirits? I believe in ghosts, but this was a whole new experience for me. So yeah, living with the unseen, hearing the whispers, and sometimes receiving unexpected gifts, it's both terrifying and strangely comforting. Thanks for listening to my story. You know, I've carried these 2 stories with me for a long time, and I thought maybe it's time to share them. They're not exactly my own experiences, but they come from my late great-grandma, and they've always stuck with me. So bear with me as I tell you about how she met the devil, and how aliens supposedly gave her a stroke. First, let me tell you a little about her. My great-grandma, or Gigi as I called her, was born in 1911 to immigrant parents. Her dad was English, and her mom came from Luxembourg. Most of their family spoke German, but Gigi only knew a little. Her mother was almost completely deaf and only spoke German, so Gigi often had to rely on her sisters to translate, or on a kind of family sign language they made up to get by. She grew up in this quiet, rural part of North Dakota. To give you a picture of the times, Gigi once told me about how, when she was a little girl, her family would barter with members of the Mandan 30. She always called them real Indians, not like the ones she saw on TV or in books. She only went to school until around 6th grade, and while she wasn't the smartest person you'd meet, she wasn't dumb either. She was a deeply religious woman, but not in that pushy way. Like, she'd give you a birthday card with a Bible verse and Ninja Turtle stickers inside. She had a picture of Jesus on her wall, but never said grace at dinner. One thing she took seriously, though, was the story of how she met the devil. She'd only tell that story when prompted, and you could tell she didn't enjoy it much. But every time, she was consistent in what she said. When she was about 10 years old, she was being a bit of a troublemaker. Her dad wasn't home, and her mother, who didn't speak much English, was trying to keep her in line. Gigi just ignored her. Finally, her mom tried to grab her, but Gigi flailed and nearly hit her. Her mother caught her hand firmly and looked her dead in the eyes, cold and serious. Then, without a word, she pointed at the closet and left the room. Now, Gigi and her siblings often got sent to that closet as a sort of timeout, so she knew she was in trouble and went to accept her punishment. But when she opened the closet door, something was inside. She described this being as having hooves and covered in dark fur, except on its torso and face where the fur thinned out. It had a man's face, with dark, deep-set eyes, an unkempt beard, and a mop of dirty black hair. The weirdest part? From only one side of its head, a single deer antler jutted out. Gigi said this being took a step forward, and she slammed the closet door shut. She shrieked so loud that her mother came running back to see what was going on. Gigi could only cry and wave her arms wildly. But her mother opened the closet, and the being was gone. She was always so serious about this story. Even now, just writing it down makes me feel unsettled. That's how my great-grandma met the devil. But there's more. A few years before she passed away, Gigi had a series of strokes. She was in her 90s then. The first one wasn't crippling, but she had to work hard to recover. My great-grandparents loved fast food. They grew up during the Depression, when food was scarce. So, to them, good food fast was a marvel. Great-grandpa loved McDonald's, but Gigi was all about pizza, especially Godfather's pizza. After she mostly recovered from her stroke, our family took them out to Godfather's to celebrate. I was this dumb kid then, more interested in arcade games than spending time with my great-grandparents. And honestly, I regret that now. I had a bunch of quarters from my dad, and after playing, I had one left. The restaurant had one of those toy dispensers, you know, with the plastic eggs. I bought one with my last quarter, and inside was a tiny plastic alien giving a peace sign. I went back to the table fiddling with this little gray alien, and Gigi noticed. She took it from me and looked at it closely. Then, with everyone watching, she held up the alien and said, "Them's the things that come and got me." My mom laughed, half joking, and asked, "What, Grandma?" Gigi repeated herself, saying that those aliens were the reason she was in the hospital. When my grandfather, her son-in-law, told her she was in the hospital because of a stroke, she nodded and said, "Them things gave me the stroke." After that, no one pressed her anymore, and things calmed down. Most of my family thought she was joking, or that the stroke made her say strange things. But I don't think she was joking. Gigi was sweet, but not one to make up stories like that. Plus, she didn't know what a gray alien was. She hadn't seen movies since the 1950s, didn't watch TV, and mostly just read the newspaper and did crafts while listening to music. Could it have been a hallucination from the stroke? Maybe, but it still feels strange to me. So, those are the stories. How my great-grandma met the devil in a closet when she was 10, and how she claimed aliens gave her a stroke in her 90s. Strange, spooky, but true to her. When my friend called my name on the night of her funeral, "Hey, I want to share with you a story that's really personal and, honestly, a bit hard for me to talk about. So please bear with me, and forgive my English since I'm Asian and still learning. It's about a friend of mine, a girl I was really close to, and the strange things that happened around the time of her funeral. Her name was Lena, and she was 16 when she passed away last week. It was sudden and heartbreaking. She died because of a mistake with her medication. I had this huge crush on her, but I never got the chance to tell her how I felt. I was actually planning to confess, maybe ask her out, but fate had other plans. On that Wednesday, Lena's condition got worse, and she was rushed to the ICU. I didn't know the full details until the next day at school, when another friend told me she had passed away at 8 p.m. the night before. I was completely shattered. I cried so much. I honestly don't even remember how long. The funeral and cremation were scheduled for Friday. My friends and I decided we all had to go together to support each other and say goodbye. On the morning of the funeral, we gathered in our classroom. Something unusual happened there. I smelled Lena's scent. It's hard to describe, but it was her unique perfume, something I always recognized instantly. I thought maybe I was imagining it, so I tried to brush it off. At the funeral, we all said our goodbyes, bringing flowers, letters, doing everything you do to honor someone. I told her I loved her and that I would miss her forever. I placed a bouquet of red roses on her chest. Even though I said goodbye, in my heart, I wasn't ready to let her go. When I got home, I tried to relax. I took a shower, hoping to wash away some of the sadness, but my mind was a mess, thinking about all the things I wanted to say to her, all the moments we never got to share. Tears came again and again. To distract myself, I turned on my PlayStation and started playing FIFA 19. The game helped, at least for a while. Around 8 p.m., my cat started making noise upstairs, rummaging around. I went up to bring her down. After I got her safely downstairs, I was walking back down the stairs when something stopped me cold. I heard a voice, clear as day, calling my name. "Hey, Red." That was my nickname, and it was Lena's voice. I froze for a moment, then my heart jumped. I wanted to see her, to talk to her, so I hurried around the house, searching for where the voice came from. When I stepped outside, the neighbors' kids were playing loudly, their laughter and shouts filling the air. But the voice I heard wasn't like theirs, softer, more gentle, but still urgent. My cats were staring intently at the garage, their fur standing on end, but I saw nothing there. I was confused and scared. After a while, I told myself maybe I was just hallucinating, overwhelmed by grief, and I went back inside to play FIFA again. But then, about 30 minutes later, I heard it again, right beside me, a soft but clear, "Hey." I looked around frantically, but there was nothing. My heart felt like it was breaking all over again. I started crying uncontrollably, whispering to myself that I would never see her again. Then, on Monday, I met up with my friends to just hang out and try to relax. I brought up what happened on Friday night. To my surprise, they had their own stories to share. One friend said he heard knocking on his window late at night but was too scared to open it. Another friend told me that while she was talking to her mom about Lena, she heard strange motor sounds nearby. We all shared our experiences, and just as we finished, I caught Lena's scent again. I searched everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. The next day, Tuesday, we held a small ceremony, a sermon or ritual meant to help release Lena's spirit. In the middle of it, I felt her presence beside me, and I caught one last faint scent of her. It was like she was there, sitting quietly next to me. After that moment, everything changed. Since then, no more scents, no more voices, no more visits. I guess what I'm trying to say is that even after someone is gone, their presence can linger in ways we don't expect. For me, it was Lena, my friend, my crush, reaching out one last time. It's been painful, but also strangely comforting. I'll always miss her, but I'm grateful for those moments when I felt she was still near. Hey, I want to share with you a story that's really personal and honestly, a bit hard for me to talk about. So please bear with me and forgive my English since I'm Asian and still learning. It's about a friend of mine, a girl I was really close to, and the strange things that happened around the time of her funeral. Her name was Lena, and she was 16 when she passed away last week. It was sudden and heartbreaking. She died because of a mistake with her medication. I had this huge crush on her, but I never got the chance to tell her how I felt. I was actually planning to confess, maybe ask her out, but fate had other plans. On that Wednesday, Lena's condition got worse, and she was rushed to the ICU. I didn't know the full details until the next day at school, when another friend told me she had passed away at 8 p.m. the night before. I was completely shattered. I cried so much. I honestly don't even remember how long. The funeral and cremation were scheduled for Friday. My friends and I decided we all had to go together to support each other and say goodbye. On the morning of the funeral, we gathered in our classroom. Something unusual happened there. I smelled Lena's scent. It's hard to describe, but it was her unique perfume, something I always recognized instantly. I thought maybe I was imagining it, so I tried to brush it off. At the funeral, we all said our goodbyes, bringing flowers, letters, doing everything you do to honor someone. I told her I loved her and that I would miss her forever. I placed a bouquet of red roses on her chest. Even though I said goodbye, in my heart, I wasn't ready to let her go. When I got home, I tried to relax. I took a shower, hoping to wash away some of the sadness. But my mind was a mess, thinking about all the things I wanted to say to her, all the moments we never got to share. Tears came again and again. To distract myself, I turned on my PlayStation and started playing FIFA 19. The game helped, at least for a while. Around 8 p.m., my cat started making noise upstairs, rummaging around. I went up to bring her down. After I got her safely downstairs, I was walking back down the stairs when something stopped me cold. I heard a voice, clear as day, calling my name. "Hey!" Red. That was my nickname, and it was Lena's voice. I froze for a moment, then my heart jumped. I wanted to see her, to talk to her, so I hailed around the house, searching for where the voice came from. When I stepped outside, the neighbors' kids were playing loudly, their laughter and shouts filling the air. But the voice I heard wasn't like theirs, softer, more gentle, but still urgent. My cats were staring intently at the garage, their fur standing on end, but I saw nothing there. I was confused and scared. After a while, I told myself maybe I was just hallucinating, overwhelmed by grief, and I went back inside to play FIFA again. But then, about 30 minutes later, I heard it again, right beside me, a soft but clear, "Hey." I looked around frantically, but there was nothing. My heart felt like it was breaking all over again. I started crying uncontrollably, whispering to myself that I would never see her again. Then, on Monday, I met up with my friends to just hang out and try to relax. I brought up what happened on Friday night. To my surprise, they had their own stories to share. One friend said he heard knocking on his window late at night, but was too scared to open it. Another friend told me that while she was talking to her mom about Lena, she heard strange motor sounds nearby. We all shared our experiences, and just as we finished, I caught Lena's scent again. I searched everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. The next day, Tuesday, we held a small ceremony, a sermon or ritual meant to help release Lena's spirit. In the middle of it, I felt her presence beside me, and I caught one last faint scent of her. It was like she was there, sitting quietly next to me. After that moment, everything changed. Since then, no more scents, no more voices, no more visits. I guess what I'm trying to say is that even after someone is gone, their presence can linger in ways we don't expect. For me, it was Lena, my friend, my crush, reaching out one last time. It's been painful, but also strangely comforting. I'll always miss her, but I'm grateful for those moments when I felt she was still near. Hey there. I want to share something from my childhood that's always stayed with me. The story of an old house I lived in as a kid. It's strange, eerie, but also kind of fascinating when you think about it. So, let's take a little journey back to Glenwood, Georgia, a small town where everyone knows each other. Probably a little too well, if you ask me. When I was about 5 years old, my parents divorced. It was a tough time, and my mom had to find a new place to live and a job pretty quickly. She ended up renting this old house just outside of town and started working at the local convenience store. The house itself was something else, a real piece of history. It was built not too long before the Civil War, with white wooden siding, a green roof, and this big front porch with a ceiling painted green as well. You know, the kind of porch that just invites you to sit and watch the world pass by. Inside, the house felt huge because the ceilings were about 14 feet high. The walls were tongue and groove, which gave the rooms a cozy yet old-fashioned charm. But the colors? Oh, they were something else. This was 1995, but the paint choices felt like a wild adventure in themselves. When you stepped in through the double front doors, you landed in a yellow foyer. Right across from you, there were double doors leading to the living room. To the right was a pink bedroom with purple floors. That's where my mom, my younger brother, and I all slept, because it had a fireplace that actually worked, unblocked and ready to warm us. On the other side of the foyer was another bedroom, painted yellow, but its fireplace was blocked up. We just called that the junk room. Behind it was the kitchen with appliances that looked straight out of the 1950s, but somehow still worked perfectly. And behind the kitchen? My playroom. It was painted blue, had a fireplace that was blocked, and was always freezing cold, no matter what season it was, Georgia summers included. The living room and bathroom weren't original. They were added later where a screened-in porch used to be. Because of that, a lot of the doors inside had these little window panes around them, like they were once doors leading outside. Out back, you could see fields stretching out, some old outhouses, and even crumbling slave shacks, a reminder of the house's long and complicated past. My memories from back then are a bit patchy, but some moments are crystal clear. I remember sitting in the foyer, looking up at that tall ceiling, and feeling this dizzying sensation, like gravity was flipping upside down and I was falling, but in a weirdly fun, scary way. Sometimes I'd do this silly thing where I'd tuck my head between my knees and look backwards, trying to recreate that feeling. It was a little unsettling, but oddly thrilling. Now, that playroom was something else entirely. Every time anyone stepped inside, the temperature dropped noticeably. It was so cold that even in the middle of summer, when Georgia was baking hot and humid, the windows stayed shut tight. And in winter, that room was unbearable, like stepping into a freezer. Sometimes, late at night, as we lay in the pink bedroom on my mom's waterbed, we'd hear what sounded like a newborn baby crying coming from that cold blue room all the way across the house. My mom would get up to check, and the crying would stop as soon as she reached the door. This happened more than once, and it always sent a chill down my spine. One time, my mom was getting dressed in the pink bedroom and suddenly noticed a man staring at her through the window. She was more angry than scared and dashed outside, but no one was there. The house sat in a big clearing, so there was no way someone could just disappear that fast. My uncle would often stay over, and man, he had it rough. Objects would fly at him out of nowhere, doors slammed behind him. The atmosphere felt hostile, like whatever was there really didn't want him around. There's one incident I'll never forget. My mom and I were sitting on the couch watching TV with a clear view of the playroom door. Suddenly, we heard the unmistakable sound of a door handle turning. The playroom door creaked open by itself and then slammed shut with such force that one of the little glass panes around the door cracked. There were no windows open, and the only other person in the house was my 2-year-old brother, who was fast asleep. These doors were heavy, solid wood with big brass knobs that were tough to turn. There was no way that door could have moved like that on its own. My mom looked at me and with a calm but firm voice said, "I think it's time we go to bed." Our neighbor across the street had lived in the area for over 20 years before we moved in. He knew the family who owned the house. It had been passed down through them for generations. According to him, around the turn of the last century, a woman who wasn't mentally well lived there. She gave birth to a baby who was deformed, and in a tragic moment, she killed the infant and burned it in the fireplace. My uncle told me this version, but my mom's neighbor said something a little different. He said the baby was stillborn and was cremated in the fireplace, which was a common practice back then. We're not sure which story is true, but many believe it was the blue playroom's fireplace where this happened, given the strange activity there. We moved out in the summer of 1996, and no one has lived in that house since. I've asked my stepmom about it from time to time, even went looking for the house once. Now it's so overgrown with weeds and vines that it's hard to spot from the road. It just sits there, rotting and decaying, a silent witness to the past. So, if you ever find yourself in Glenwood, Georgia, stop by the Ochwaukee Country Store. From there, take a left onto County Road 12, drive about a quarter to half a mile, and look to the right. Behind a rusty chain-link fence, hidden in the woods, you might just catch a glimpse of the roof line of that old house. It's a little piece of history, wrapped in mystery, and maybe a little bit of the supernatural, too. Hey, I want to share something that happened to me a couple of years ago. Something that's haunted me ever since. It's one of those moments that just sticks with you. The kind that sends a shiver down your spine every time you think back on it. So, there's this old factory in our town, built way back in 1890 and opened the next year. Originally, it was a sewing factory where folks handcrafted detachable collars and cuffs. Imagine the clatter of sewing machines and the soft rustle of fabric filling the air. By 1999, the factory had been transformed into a collection of small consignment shops, each room housing something different. The place still has these massive old elevator shafts with those rickety, creaky gated doors that groan when they move. It's like stepping back into another era. One evening, my friend, let's call him Nate, and I decided to check out a new bookstore that had just opened up inside the factory. We made our way downstairs, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath our feet, and wandered over to the store. After browsing for a bit, we sat down on a bench for a break before leaving. The bench was pressed flat against a wall, giving us a clear view down the entire hallway. To our right, there was a flight of stairs, and to our left, one of the shops. We had the place mostly to ourselves, or at least, that's what we thought. As we sat there chatting quietly, I started to feel this creeping unease, like a cold shadow crawling over my skin. I told Nate I wanted to leave, said we should hurry up because something about the place just didn't sit right with me. He told me to chill out, said we'd head out soon, and honestly, the feeling faded for a moment. But then, just as we were about to stand up, something caught our eyes. a figure appeared around the corner, moving toward us. At first, we thought it was the maintenance guy. Since the factory was still open, that made sense. But the way he moved was off. It was unnatural, like he was gliding rather than walking. He came to the end of the hallway, stopped, and stared at the wall in front of him for about 5 seconds. Just staring, utterly still. Then he slowly turned to face us, paused again, and began walking straight toward us. That turn was what really freaked me out. It was like he knew we were there before he even peeked around the corner. And here's the thing. We'd been sitting there quietly, barely whispering, and the hallway stretched a good 30 or 40 feet behind us. For him to know we were there without a sound, it didn't make sense. I went into full panic mode, but Nate stayed calm. The place was open. We weren't doing anything wrong, just sitting on a bench. Nate looked up at the man and said, "Hey, how's it going?" But the man didn't respond. He just kept coming, fast now. I looked into his eyes. There was no emotion at all. No anger, no happiness, no confusion. Nothing. It was like staring into a void, and it sent a chill that wrapped around my heart. Even after Nate spoke, the man was completely unfazed, like he was on some kind of mission. If he was the maintenance guy, you'd think he'd say something. Time to leave, or at least return the greeting. But no, just that blank, expressionless face moving closer and closer. At that moment, Nate and I exchanged a silent look, a shared understanding that we had to get out of there. Without a word, we bolted toward the exit. The sound of our footsteps echoed off the walls as we ran, adrenaline pumping through our veins, the eerie silence pressing in behind us. Once we were safely outside, down the street and away from that old building, the heavy weight of fear lifted, and I started to calm down. We didn't really talk about what we'd just seen, just headed back to my place in silence. Since that night, I've never stepped foot back inside that factory or any of the shops. Something about that man, that presence, it just wasn't right. Even now, just recounting it, I get that cold shiver. I'm someone who believes in the paranormal, and I can tell you, whatever that was, it definitely wasn't human. Hey, I want to share something really unsettling that happened to me just last night. It's honestly one of the creepiest experiences I've had, and I've had a few strange things help before. But this one, it really shook me. So, just to give you a bit of background, I'm a 37-year-old guy living in Birmingham, England. I live with my wife, our Japanese Akita dog, and my mother-in-law. We're taking care of her because she's quite ill. Her husband passed away a little over 5 years ago, so the house has had its share of heavy moments. Last night, I had this terrible dream. I was actually shaking and making these fast, almost panicked noises. My wife woke me up because of it. Apparently, I was sort of mini-screaming in my sleep. When I snapped awake, I realized that the dream wasn't just a one-off. It was part of a series of dreams, like one led to another, stretching back over several nights. If you've never had those before, where one dream just keeps continuing into another, it's pretty unsettling. In this particular dream, there was this enormous pink balloon in what would be our future child's bedroom. We're planning to start a family soon, so the idea of a child's room feels very real to me. Now here's the disturbing part. The balloon wasn't just a balloon. It seemed to be a memorial for a child who had died, and I think it was supposed to represent our daughter, even though she hasn't been born yet. My wife had made this balloon somehow, though I have no idea how she did it in the dream. Throughout the previous dreams, I'd been terrified of this balloon, and last night, it felt malevolent. It followed me around, and I honestly felt like it wanted to kill me. Then, suddenly it floated past me so fast that I screamed and ran to the bathroom. My wife came in, probably worried because I was shouting, and I told her, The balloon's going to kill me." She didn't believe me at first, until the balloon, yes, the balloon, actually opened the bathroom door. That's when I woke up, heart pounding. Now here's where things get really strange. After waking, I got up to get a drink and then came back to bed. My wife asked me about the dream, and I told her, but I left out the part about the balloon representing our unborn daughter. I guess I wasn't ready to say it out loud. As I lay there, trying to shake off the nightmare, I started to feel this eerie coldness creep over my body. It was like an invisible chill wrapping around me, even though I was sweating underneath the duvet. Our heating was on, and it was a warm 23 degrees Celsius in the house, so this cold was unnatural. I thought about that balloon again and glanced over at the TV. And right at that exact moment, the LED lights behind my TV flicked on, just like that, instantly. I swear, it was the exact second I looked. My heart jumped, and my wife noticed too, and said it was weird. Now, here's an interesting detail. My mother-in-law's late husband was an electrician, and he had a real fascination with LEDs. I'm not saying it was him or anything, but the lights behind the TV have turned on randomly before. Maybe because of my PS5 updating overnight or something technical. But usually, the lights come on or off within seconds of the TV itself turning on. This time, they stayed on for about 2 minutes. Then the worst happened. The LEDs turned off, and about 2 seconds later, the TV flashed. And it wasn't like any normal flash you'd expect. It was an oval-shaped flash, like a glowing shape that looked eerily like either a big balloon or maybe a human face. It was only part of the screen, not the whole 46 inches of it. My wife and I both saw it, and I swear we froze in fear. I got out of bed immediately and unplugged the TV and all the other electrical devices from the wall. It was like something was trying to communicate or warn us. After that, I couldn't sleep. My body kept feeling these waves of ice-cold chills, even though I was sweating and the room was warm. The heating was still on, the duvet heavy, and yet I felt this unnatural coldness. Our dog usually sleeps in the room with us, but last night he was curled up at the top of the stairs outside our room. That's not entirely unusual, but it felt different this time, like he was uneasy too. Eventually, I drifted off, and thankfully, the rest of the night was quiet. But honestly, I'm still shaken. It's hard to explain, but the whole experience felt like something was right there with us, watching, maybe even trying to reach out. I hope I never go through something like that again. Thanks for listening to my story. It's strange and scary, but sometimes sharing it helps make it feel a little less heavy. Hey there. I want to share with you a couple of stories that have been part of my life. One from when I was just a teenager, and another from more recent times. Both involve living alongside spirits in places I called home. So, grab a seat, maybe a warm drink, and let me take you through these experiences. When I was about 15 years old, life took a strange turn. My mom worked at a nursing home, and due to some tough circumstances, we had to leave the house we'd been living in. That house, by the way, was already known to be haunted. Yeah, not the best situation for a young teenager. We needed somewhere to stay quickly, and my mom had a close relationship with the owner of the nursing home where she worked. Knowing our plight, the owner kindly offered us a place to stay right there, in the nursing home itself. Now, this wasn't just any part of the nursing home. There was an entire wing of rooms that had been unused for years. They were kept clean, sure, but no one ever stayed there. The owner told my mom we could take the last 2 rooms at the end of the hallway, right across from each other. The doors leading to this wing were massive and heavy, making this loud, echoing thud whenever they were opened or closed. The staff and residents avoided this wing completely. It was just empty rooms with beds, nothing else. At first, it felt okay living there, but the wing never really felt empty. Walking down that long hallway, you'd get this unsettling feeling, like eyes were watching you from the shadows. It was subtle at first, just an eerie sensation that crept up your spine. One night, my little sister and I, feeling a bit playful, decided to play around with my mom's phone while she was working. We started recording ourselves making silly noises and talking in goofy voices, just trying to have fun and pass the time. Then, at one point, we ran out of things to say and just sat quietly for a bit. I stopped the recording, forgetting about it the next day. When we listened back through the recordings, everything was mostly laughter and silliness, until we reached that last one. It started silent, but just as we were about to stop listening, we heard a deep, sharp breath being drawn in. It wasn't ours. It wasn't anything we'd made. We were frozen, our hearts pounding, scared out of our wits. Who else was there? That was just the beginning. On another night, my mom was working late, my sister was asleep across the hall, and I was watching TV alone in my room. It was a normal evening, nothing unusual, until, suddenly, the door to my room began to be pounded on. And I don't mean a gentle knock. This was violent, heavy pounding that sounded like the door might just be ripped right off its hinges. I called out, "Hello?" But no answer came. The pounding continued, and then the doorknob started shaking violently, like something, or someone, was desperately trying to get inside. I always left the door unlocked just in case my sister woke up and needed me, so I knew it wasn't locked from the outside. My heart was racing. I was terrified that the noise would wake my sister. I ducked into the bathroom attached to my room, trying to make myself small and quiet. As I listened to the relentless banging, a thought struck me. If there was really someone out there, I would have heard the doors to the wing opening or closing. Those big, heavy doors make a lot of noise, but I hadn't heard a thing. No creaks, no latches, nothing. It was like the pounding was coming from nowhere. After what felt like forever, about 5 minutes, it stopped suddenly. Shaken but curious, I crept out into the hallway. The door showed no dents or damage, and there was no one to be seen. I checked on my sister. She was sound asleep, completely unaware. I asked the staff if they'd heard anything, but they hadn't noticed a thing. I even asked if any resident had gotten into the wing, and they confirmed everyone was accounted for, all in bed. I knew then, without a doubt, that it wasn't any person from the nursing home. It was something else entirely. Thankfully, after that night, nothing else happened while we stayed there. Fast forward to more recent times, and here I am again, sharing a space with a presence that's become almost like a roommate. I've had 4 separate encounters with this spirit, and on 2 of those occasions, other people have seen it too. They describe seeing an older man, maybe in his 40s or 50s. The first time it happened, I was on a video call with a friend, eating pizza in my kitchen. I left the kitchen briefly, and my friend jokingly asked if I was going to share any pizza with my roommate. I live alone, so that puzzled me. They told me they saw a black shadow moving in the background, like someone walking by. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe just a trick of the light. Then a girlfriend of mine, who claims she can communicate with spirits, came over. I asked her to see if she could sense anything. The conversation was brief, but chilling. Her, "Are you here?" Spirit, "I'm here." Her, "Does he know about you?" Spirit, "Yeah." Her, "Okay, bye." She got spooked and cut it short. As we left, she said the spirit was watching us from the porch. An older man. Another friend who's sensitive to spirit energy came by. From the moment she stepped inside, she felt something. She said the spirit was harmless but lonely, hanging around the kitchen. When we left, she said he was watching from the porch again. I hadn't told her about the previous encounter. The 4th time, I was live streaming on Twitch. I wish I'd saved the clip because you could see a shadowy figure walk past behind me, from the kitchen to the porch. It looked just like a black silhouette. Curious and eager to understand, I consulted a medium recently. And here's the thing, I hadn't told her any of the prior stories or encounters. She told me the spirit's name was Joe, a middle-aged man who died of a heart attack sometime in the 1990s. At first, I was skeptical, but then she shared some details that caught my attention. She said Joe liked my pets. That made me smile because sometimes I catch my cat staring intently at something unseen, like he's watching someone I can't see. She also mentioned Joe liked my guitar, a 90s Peavey, which fits with the time he supposedly lived. And the kicker? She said Joe loves pizza. Remember my first encounter? I was eating pizza when the shadow appeared. That connection felt uncanny. She also told me Joe didn't like it when I played loud music. I'm in a rock band, and our practice sessions can get pretty noisy. It made me chuckle, imagining Joe covering his ears. The medium said Joe is a good spirit, enjoys having company around, and likes to make his presence known in little ways. Just the other night, as I lay down in my bedroom, I felt a sudden rush of energy and emotion wash over me. My light flickered briefly. I think Joe was saying hello. Honestly, I'm still figuring all this out. I've tried some ghost apps, but they feel gimmicky. I'm considering trying a Ouija board, though. That could open a whole other chapter. So here I am, sharing this with you all, hoping to connect with others who understand or might have advice. How do you talk to a spirit who's become a roommate? How do I learn more about Joe as a person, beyond just a shadow in the corner? Thanks for listening to my stories. It's strange and sometimes scary, but it's become part of my life's tapestry, living with shadows and the unseen. I should probably start by saying I'm not someone who naturally believes in the paranormal. My whole way of understanding the world is built around science, evidence, and logic. I don't usually jump to ghosts or anything supernatural when something strange happens. Unless I experience something undeniable for myself, I'm going to search for a rational explanation first. But there are two experiences I still think about, and neither of them has ever settled comfortably in my mind. The first happened one evening when I was alone in my apartment. I had spent most of the day stretched out on my burnt orange couch, watching episode after episode of a crime drama. At some point, I reached for my phone and realized I couldn't find it. I checked my pockets. I stood up and looked beneath me. I searched under the throw blanket, behind the cushion, between the cushions, underneath the couch, and all around it. Nothing. Then I checked the kitchen, the entryway, the bathroom, and every surface I might have absent-mindedly set it on. I even returned to the living room and searched the couch all over again. Still nothing. By then, I was frustrated enough to assume I must have left it in the bedroom earlier that morning. I searched the bedroom and the attached bathroom, opening drawers and checking places that made absolutely no sense. Eventually, I gave up and decided to check my car. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the bedroom. That was when I saw it. My phone was lying in plain sight on the orange couch, directly on the spot where I had been sitting. Not tucked beneath anything, not wedged between the cushions, just sitting there. I froze. I know how ridiculous that sounds. People overlook things all the time. But I had searched that exact spot repeatedly. I had lifted the blanket, moved the cushion, stood up, sat down, and run my hands across the couch. There was no reasonable way I should have missed it. A cold wave went through my entire body. The apartment suddenly felt unfamiliar, almost as though someone else had been standing there without making a sound. I searched every room again, but this time I wasn't looking for my phone. I was looking for a person. Of course, no one was there. The second experience happened several months later, during one of the worst weeks of my life. My sister had died by suicide, and I had gone home for the funeral. Everything about that visit felt heavy and unreal. Afterward, my father drove me toward the airport in the middle of the night. It was around 3 in the morning. We were traveling along narrow back roads outside Wilmington, roads surrounded by thick woods, scattered houses, and the occasional dark office building. There were long stretches where we didn't see another car. As we came over the crest of a hill, our headlights suddenly illuminated a man standing in the middle of our lane. He looked severely disheveled. His arms and legs were spread wide, and his face was tilted straight toward the sky. He wasn't waving for help. He wasn't trying to move. He was simply standing there, as though he were waiting for the car to strike him. My father jerked the wheel and missed him by what felt like inches. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. We were too shocked to process what had happened. Once we had calmed down enough, my father pulled over. We agreed that we couldn't just leave the man there, so we turned around to see whether he needed help. Less than a minute had passed. When we returned, the road was empty. We slowed down and searched both sides of the road. We called into the darkness and looked toward the tree line, but there was no movement and no sign of him anywhere. The most logical explanation is that he ran into the woods. Maybe he was in crisis. Maybe he was confused, intoxicated, or experiencing a severe mental health episode. I understand that there are many possible explanations that have nothing to do with the supernatural. But I still can't understand where he came from. There were no nearby sidewalks, stores, shelters, or houses close enough for someone to wander casually onto that stretch of road. It was cold, isolated, and almost completely silent. And if his intention was to be struck by a vehicle, why choose a slow, winding road in the middle of the night where a car might not pass for hours? I don't know. Maybe both experiences were nothing more than ordinary events made frightening by confusion, exhaustion, and grief. Maybe I overlooked my phone. Maybe the man disappeared into the woods faster than we realized. Those are the explanations I try to accept. But every now and then, I picture that phone resting neatly on the couch. Then I picture that man beneath the headlights, staring into the empty sky. And I wonder whether logic explains everything, or whether sometimes it simply gives us somewhere safer to stand. Okay, I know this might sound like a strange little moment, and maybe there's a completely normal explanation for it. But even after all these years, I've never been able to forget what happened. When I was younger, my family used to stay at a holiday bungalow park on the Isle of Wight. The bungalows were arranged across a few different levels, and ours was on the lowest one, near where my grandparents and some of my extended family were staying. Right in front of the bungalows was this huge open field surrounded by greenery. It was honestly a beautiful place, especially when the whole family was there. I think I was around 13 or 14 at the time, and my cousin was a couple of years younger. We spent most of our days outside, running around the field and making up games. Our favorite place was at the far end of the grass, where there was a steep little hill with a single tree at the top. Someone had worn a narrow path into the slope, leading right into the tree. The branches were low enough to sit on, and you could climb around inside it, so naturally we thought it was the best hiding place in the world. Now, the Isle of Wight has a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in Britain. I'd already experienced a few odd things during our visits, but this was the moment that stayed with me the most. One afternoon, my cousin and I were playing in the field when we decided to climb up to the tree. I remember running across the grass and reaching the bottom of the hill. The slope was surprisingly steep, so we had to pull ourselves up by grabbing handfuls of grass. I was climbing in front, and my cousin was just behind me. We were about halfway up when we heard a voice. It said very clearly, "Hi," but it didn't sound like a normal person. The voice was cold and muffled, almost as though someone were speaking while pinching their nose. It had this strange nasal quality that made the single word sound completely wrong. We both stopped. At first, I thought someone might be hiding behind the tree, trying to frighten us. But the leaves were thin, and from where we were standing, we could see through the branches and around the trunk. There was nobody there. My cousin and I looked at each other, turned around, and scrambled back down the hill as fast as we could. We ran straight to our parents and told them what had happened, but of course, they assumed we had imagined it or heard another child nearby. Later, I tried recording myself saying hi in different voices, hoping I could recreate what we had heard and make sense of it. I couldn't. Nothing sounded like that voice. Years later, someone told me a story about the tree. Supposedly, a young girl had once been sheltering beneath it when it was struck by lightning, and she didn't survive. I heard that from another child staying at the bungalow park, so I never knew whether it was true or simply a scary story being passed around. Still, I sometimes wonder about it. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe the sound carried strangely across the field. Maybe there was an explanation we simply couldn't see. But in that moment, the whole atmosphere changed. Everything suddenly felt still and heavy, as though something was watching us from inside that tree. I know it probably sounds small. It was only one word. But sometimes one word is enough. Even now, I can still hear that cold, muffled voice saying hello from a place where nobody was standing. Right after college, my sister and I decided to rent a place together on the south side of Austin. We toured house after house, but the rental market was brutal. Both of our apartment leases were about to expire, so eventually we chose an older two-story house and told ourselves we could live with whatever problems came with it. Honestly, the place felt wrong from the beginning. It was run down, poorly maintained, and tucked into a neighborhood that got unnervingly quiet after dark. Within days of moving in, small things started happening. Items we left on the kitchen counters would somehow end up on the floor overnight. Things would disappear, only to show up weeks later in obvious places, like the middle of the dining table or on top of one of our pillows. Then black mold suddenly spread across my sister's bathroom ceiling. It seemed to appear almost overnight, and no matter how often we cleaned it, it came back thicker. The landlord refused to help. Around that same time, we both started having horrible nightmares. Some nights, one of us would quietly walk into the other's room and ask to stay there until morning. We had both lived alone before, so this wasn't normal for us. We weren't afraid of being by ourselves. We were afraid of being alone in that house. My sister and I worked opposite schedules, which meant we usually only saw each other late at night. At first, we blamed each other whenever something strange happened. We argued about moved objects, open cabinets, and lights being left on. Then the house gave us something we couldn't explain away. One evening, I came home from work while my sister was still on her shift. I got into the shower, and a few minutes later, I heard her come upstairs. She started talking to me through the bathroom door about some drama at work. It was a continuation of a conversation we'd had the night before. I answered her, she answered me back, and we had a completely normal conversation for several minutes. When I stepped out of the shower, her voice suddenly sounded different. It became flatter somehow, almost hollow. I opened the bathroom door. Nobody was there. I checked her bedroom, called down the stairs, and searched the entire second floor. Then I called her phone. She answered from work. She hadn't come home at all. When she finally got back that night, I told her what had happened. She went completely pale and said, "That happened to me a few days ago." She explained that she had been sleeping after a late shift when she heard me come through the front door. She heard me walking around downstairs and talking. She called out to me, and whatever was downstairs replied in my voice. When she got up to look, the house was empty. She had convinced herself she was half asleep and imagining things. After that, the activity became more frequent. There were several occasions when one of us would speak to the other from another room, only to discover that the other person wasn't home. But the worst night happened when we were both there. We were upstairs in our separate bedrooms watching television. Both of our doors were open. Suddenly, I heard two people talking downstairs. The voices sounded familiar. Too familiar. I muted my television. A few seconds later, I heard my sister turn hers off too. We both stepped into our doorways and listened. Downstairs, our voices were having a conversation. It sounded exactly like us. The same rhythm, the same little laughs, even the same expressions we used with each other. But neither of us was speaking. We stood frozen in the hallway, listening to something downstairs pretend to be us. Then one of the voices said my sister's name. We screamed, ran down the stairs without looking toward the living room, and flew out the front door. From outside, I called our aunt, who has always been deeply spiritual. I was crying so hard she could barely understand me. She gave us a prayer to recite and told us to write it on paper, cleanse every room with sage, and then burn the prayer outside. We followed every instruction. When the paper finished burning, the remaining ash had curled into a shape that looked unmistakably like an angel with spread wings. I still have the photograph. The house became quieter after that, but the feeling never completely disappeared. We broke our lease soon afterward because neither of us could sleep there anymore. For months, we barely spoke about what happened. Eventually, we started comparing our memories, and we realized we had heard the same voices, the same footsteps, and the same strange changes in tone. Later, we learned that two previous tenants had died inside the house. One had been killed during a shooting, and another had died by suicide. To this day, my sister and I believe something in that house was studying us. It listened to our conversations, learned the sound of our voices, and waited until one of us was alone before trying to become the other. Whatever it was, it didn't just haunt that house. It learned how to speak through us. Hi, I'm sharing this because I honestly don't know what to make of it anymore. Every time I've tried telling someone, they've said I was tired, imagining things, or frightening myself. Maybe they're right. I've always considered myself skeptical, so I'm not eager to call this paranormal. I just know that these experiences feel incredibly real, and lately, they've been happening more often. There's a particular corner of my bedroom where I sometimes see a man. He's unusually tall and wears what looks like an old-fashioned bowler hat. He's always holding a cigar. I can't see any features on his face because his entire body looks like a dark silhouette, but the shape of him is unmistakably human. The first time I saw him, I was around 6 years old. My mother told me that, for several weeks, I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Whenever she entered my room, she would notice a faint smell of tobacco smoke. I would point toward the same corner and tell her that a man had been standing there. She never saw him. Whenever she asked whether he was still in the room, I would tell her that he disappeared the moment she opened the door. After about 2 months, it stopped. Eventually, everyone treated it like one of those strange childhood phases. I barely thought about it for years. Then, recently, I started seeing him again. He usually appears near the tall mirror beside my wardrobe. He doesn't move or make any sound, He simply stands there, facing me. Sometimes I can even see the outline of his shadow reflected in the glass. That's one of the details I can't explain. If it were just a shadow caused by furniture or light from outside, I feel like I should be able to trace where it's coming from. But I've moved things around, closed the curtains, changed the position of my lamps, and checked the hallway light. The figure still appears. A few months before he returned, I began having a recurring dream. In the dream, I'm watching myself sleep from somewhere near the ceiling. My sleeping body is turned toward the wall. Then my viewpoint slowly shifts toward the corner of the room. The man steps out of the darkness. He walks toward the bed very slowly. When he reaches me, he leans forward and stretches out one hand, almost as though he's about to touch my shoulder. Just before he does, my sleeping body turns around to face him. The moment that happens, he disappears. I had that dream every few nights for nearly 7 weeks. Then the dream changed. Everything happened the same way, except there was a pale, glowing circle surrounding my bed. When the man tried to step through it, his body jerked backward, almost as though the light had burned or shocked him. After that version of the dream, the nightmare stopped. I still don't know what the light was supposed to mean. Maybe it was simply my mind trying to make me feel protected. I would honestly prefer that explanation. The man isn't the only figure I've seen. On 4 separate occasions, I've seen the face of a woman in another part of my bedroom. It usually happens when a narrow strip of light falls across the wall near my dresser. I'll look over and see her face inside that patch of light. She has a calm but completely blank expression. She never looks directly at me. It feels more like she's staring through me, or watching something just behind my shoulder. The first few times, I assumed it was an illusion created by the shadows. I got out of bed and walked closer, expecting the image to change. It didn't. When I switched on the main light, she vanished. But when I turned it off again, her face returned in exactly the same place. I checked the window, the curtains, the streetlights, and every reflective surface I could find. I still couldn't work out where that narrow beam of light was coming from. The woman seems unaware of me. The man does not. I can't explain how I know, but I feel certain that he understands I can see him. Even without a face, there's something deliberate about the way he stands there. I can see the cigar extending from where his mouth should be, and sometimes I can even see smoke curling upward from it. Strangely, I never smell the smoke now. It has reached the point where I sometimes speak to him. I've asked who he is. I've asked what he wants. I've told him that he's frightening me. He never reacts. He never answers or moves. He simply remains beside the mirror. There have been nights when I've fallen asleep while he was standing there. I'll wake up hours later, and he'll still be in the same position. As far as I can tell, he only disappears when the sky begins to brighten. I also catch glimpses of other shapes in my peripheral vision. It doesn't only happen in my house. I've seen figures moving through hallways at friends' homes, or standing silently in doorways before vanishing when I turn my head. That makes me wonder whether this is connected to the house, connected to me, or simply something my mind is creating. I don't know much about the history of the property. There haven't been any recent deaths in my family, and I can't think of any major event that might have triggered this. I'm trying not to panic, and I'm trying not to convince myself that something supernatural is happening. But the experiences are becoming more frequent, and it's getting harder to dismiss them. I'm sorry this was so long. I just needed to explain everything clearly, because I genuinely don't know whether I'm seeing something real, or whether my own mind is turning shadows into people. I would really appreciate hearing what someone else thinks. You know, there are moments in life that stick with you, not just because they're unusual, but because they defy explanation, leaving you with a mix of awe and unease. I want to share a few of those moments with you, stories that have lingered in my mind for years. So, settle in, and maybe you'll feel the chill I felt back then. Let me take you back about 8 years ago. I was hanging out with my friend, let's call her Lila. One crisp early fall evening in Minnesota, we decided to take a walk to this park not too far from our place. We had a bottle of spiced rum with us, thinking we'd crack it open when we got there. But you know how it goes. One sip led to another, and before we knew it, we were sipping some on the way. The walk was about 2.5 miles, maybe closer to 3. It took us just over half an hour, the kind of walk where the sun starts to dip just as you arrive. When we got to the park, it was around 7 p.m., and the dark was settling in softly, painting the sky in blues and purples. We were chatting and laughing, messing around on the swings and slides like kids again. The cold was starting to creep in with the sunset, so after a bit, we decided to huddle on one of the wooden benches. Wrapped in our jackets, the park's quiet hum surrounded us. The distant sounds of cars, the occasional bark of a dog, leaves rustling in the breeze. We kept drinking and talking for nearly an hour, the kind of deep, meandering conversation that flows when you're comfortable. Then, as the sun finally slipped below the horizon, something strange began to happen. We heard this low, persistent hum. At first, we thought it was just construction noise or traffic. After all, the park sat in a pretty populated area, with houses just a stone's throw away in every direction. So we ignored it, thinking nothing of it, and kept chatting. But then, the hum grew louder, more distinct. We turned our gaze toward the open baseball field in front of us. It was dark now, the field barely visible under the dim glow of the streetlights at its edges. Then, across the field, we saw it. A shadow. It swayed slightly, and at first we thought it might be a person wandering in the dark. We watched, frozen. The shadow began to grow, becoming larger, moving closer. Our hearts pounded as the shape morphed into a black mass, towering, maybe 12 feet tall, 6 feet wide, gliding silently across the field toward us. The air grew colder, the hum now a low vibration in our chests. We sat rooted to the bench, fear threading through our veins. The mass came within 20 yards, then nothing. I don't remember what happened next. The world went black. I woke up the next morning on my mother's porch, about a mile from the park. My head throbbed, ache pounding in rhythm with my heartbeat, maybe from the rum, maybe something else. My mom was frantic, eyes wide, asking why I had cuts and bruises all over. I was as confused as she was. I tried to piece the night together, but my memories were foggy, fragmented. Then, my phone buzzed. It was Lila. She was in the hospital, her wrist broken, some scrapes and bruises. When I told her what I remembered, she said she couldn't recall anything after hearing that hum. She'd just woken up in the hospital. To this day, I have no idea what really happened that night. Lila and I lost touch, but the last time we spoke, she was just as baffled. If anyone else has experienced anything like this, I would love to hear about it. The park was Cavell Park in northeast Minneapolis, if you're curious. Now, shifting gears, have you ever heard about the worst case of demonic possession recorded? It's Halloween season, so it's the perfect time to share this chilling tale. You might know the 2005 movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose, but did you know it's based on a true story from 1975 in West Germany? The story revolves around a young woman named Anneliese Michel, born in 1952 in the small town of Klingenberg. Raised in a devout Catholic family, Anneliese was bright and hopeful. But at 16, everything changed. She suffered her first epileptic seizure and began experiencing paranormal phenomena, hearing voices, seeing shadows. Over the next several years, despite medical treatment, her condition worsened. She started hallucinating terrifying demon faces and hearing voices during prayer, condemning her to eternal damnation. She smelled foul odors, burnt objects, excrement, that others around her also noticed. Annalisa began reacting violently to holy objects. Crucifixes, Bibles, even holy water made her recoil. She avoided church altogether, once describing the ground beneath her feet as burning as she approached a shrine. She believed she was possessed, blaming a family curse linked to her mother's past. Her family, desperate and fearful, sought help from the church. Initially, their request for an exorcism was denied. Meanwhile, Annalisa's behavior became more disturbing. She harmed herself and her family, consumed spiders, flies, and even her own urine. Witnesses reported her superhuman strength, throwing her sister across a room as if she weighed nothing. There were rumors she bit the head off a bird and ate it. Through it all, she blamed herself, convinced of her damnation. Finally, in 1975, the church granted permission for an exorcism. Father Arnold Renz led the sessions, which began in September and continued over 60 times. During these, Annalisa screamed in terrifying voices, claiming to be possessed by 6 demons: Lucifer, Cain, Judas, Hitler, Nero, and Fleischmann. Her health deteriorated rapidly. She refused to eat, saying the demons prevented her. She wasted away to just 68 pounds, yet her strength remained unnerving. Despite the exorcisms, she died on July 1, 1976, eerily predicting her death beforehand. After her death, her parents and the priests were put on trial in 1978. The court heard tapes from the exorcisms, audio that is truly disturbing. The priests were suspended and fined, but avoided jail time. The family later exhumed Annalisa's body for a proper burial. But the story didn't end there. In June 2013, the house where she lived caught fire under mysterious circumstances. Locals reported seeing a figure believed to be Annalisa's spirit. The fire occurred on June 6/2013, adding a chilling layer of symbolism to the tragedy. And finally, I want to share a story from my own childhood in a tiny village in Finland, a place filled with dense woods and forgotten farms. We had these old barns and houses that no one cared for anymore, slowly crumbling into the earth. One place near my home was a ring of ancient spruces, growing in a perfect circle, a place that felt almost magical, especially when fairy rings of mushrooms appeared inside. But the most peculiar spot was something we called the Bone Pit. It was unlike any other place we knew. You could never find it twice in the same spot. The first time I came across it, I was around 8 years old, playing in a meadow near my cousin's house. I stumbled upon a small pit in the ground, big enough for a curled-up adult. Inside, I saw sun-bleached bones, fragmented pig bones, no skulls or ribs. I had seen animal bones before, scattered near old houses, but this was strange because the pit was in the open meadow. I didn't think much of it and even moved some bones away from where I played, thinking it was normal. But then, something odd happened. I looked away for just a few seconds, maybe 4 steps away, and when I turned back, the pit had vanished. I searched frantically, parting grass, scanning the ground, but the pit was gone. I called out to my cousin, telling her what happened. She just shrugged and said, "Yeah, it just disappears sometimes," and walked on. Knowing her, I thought she was teasing me. I kept searching along the edge of the dark forest bordering the meadow, but no luck. Eventually, I gave up and ran to catch up with her. The very next year, I found it again, just as clear, just as chilling. No grass had grown inside it. I wanted to get closer, to examine the bones better, but a creeping unease stopped me. I turned to share with my friends, and in that brief moment, it vanished once more. It felt like the pit was mocking me, playing hide and seek. Once, my little sister found it and excitedly called me over. I was too frustrated to care and told her, "Yeah, sure," brushing her off. She wanted to show our mom, dragging her to the spot, but when they got there, the pit had disappeared again. Mom tried to comfort her, but you could see the disbelief in her eyes. Years later, we talked about it. My sister was relieved to know I believed her, and we wondered what it all meant. Was the ground uneven, hiding the pit from certain angles? Maybe, but it had disappeared right in front of us 3 different times in a place we all knew like the back of our hands. I guess some mysteries are meant to stay that way, haunting the edges of our memories, reminding us that not everything in this world is meant to be understood. But sharing these stories, maybe we find a little comfort in knowing we're not alone in experiencing the strange and unexplainable. Okay, just hear me out. Everyone I've told so far thinks I'm imagining things, and honestly, I understand why. I've been smoking on and off for around 3 years, and before moving into this house, I had never hallucinated or seen anything that truly frightened me. The first strange incident happened when I was home alone. I had just smoked and was getting ready for an afternoon shift when I heard several loud clattering sounds coming from the kitchen. My bedroom is close to both the kitchen and the living room, so when I open my door, I can see most of those areas from the hallway. A few seconds after the noise started, our 2 dogs began barking uncontrollably from their crate. That was when I felt it. Something was wrong. I messaged my family to ask whether anyone had come home without telling me. Everyone confirmed they were still out. Both outside doors were locked, and all the windows were shut. I stood inside my room for a while, trying to convince myself to look. When I finally opened the door, I watched a small glass sitting on the dining table slowly tip onto its side. It had water in it, so it wasn't empty or especially light. There was no breeze, no open window, and nothing near it that could have pushed it. I immediately closed my door again. I was terrified, but I still had to leave for work. I grabbed the wooden lamp beside my bed because it was the closest thing I had to protection, then slowly walked toward the kitchen. Everything looked normal. The only thing out of place was the fallen glass. The dogs had stopped barking, but they were staring toward the staircase. I let them out because I didn't want to be alone while I finished getting ready. Then I rushed out of the house. Later, while everyone was still away, our downstairs neighbor heard a heavy crash from our apartment. We live in a 2-family house, with her unit directly below ours. Right after the crash, she heard the dogs barking wildly. Because I had accidentally left the door unlocked, she came upstairs to check on them. She found both dogs standing at the bottom of the staircase, barking toward the 2nd floor. Neither of them would climb the steps. She went back downstairs and called my mother. When my family returned home, they discovered that a large framed decoration from the living room had fallen forward onto the floor. It hadn't simply slipped down the wall. It looked as though someone had pushed it over. Our dogs are tiny. There was no way they could have moved something that heavy. Nothing else happened for several weeks, so I tried to forget about it. Then, about 10 days ago, I smoked upstairs with my brother. After a while, I became tired and lay down on the edge of his bed. I was staring at the dresser when I noticed something crawling along the side of it. It looked like a spider, but far too large to be real. Its body was nearly the size of a beach ball, with thin legs stretching across the drawers. I blinked several times. It was still there. I turned toward the window because I didn't want to look at it anymore. But while staring at the evening clouds, I started seeing faces inside them. They were twisted and deeply unsettling, as though the clouds were forming expressions that weren't meant to belong to human faces. I know how this sounds. I looked back at the dresser, hoping the creature would be gone. It wasn't. Eventually, I closed my eyes and fell asleep. By the next morning, everything seemed normal again. For the next few days, I didn't see anything unusual. Then it happened again last night. I had smoked with my brother and was sitting in his desk chair. My back was facing the bedroom door, and I was looking toward the dark window. Suddenly, I felt this intense sensation that something was directly behind me, clinging to the ceiling. I turned around, but there was nothing there. When I faced the window again, I saw the spider-shaped figure reflected in the glass. This time, it was enormous. It seemed to cover most of the ceiling behind me, completely black and darker than any ordinary shadow. I kept telling myself that it was only the lighting, that my mind was filling in shapes because I was high. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I couldn't stay in that room, so I went downstairs, climbed into bed, and pulled the blankets over my head until I finally fell asleep. I woke up a few hours ago, and I still can't stop thinking about it. I've decided to stop smoking for a while. These visions only happen when I'm high, so I know there could be a completely ordinary explanation involving anxiety, stress, or the way my mind reacts to it. Still, even when I'm sober, I sometimes get that prickling sensation that someone is standing behind me. It usually happens when I'm alone at work or walking through the house late at night. I keep trying to convince myself that it's nothing. I just wish I could fully believe that. Have you ever seen something so strange that even years later, you still find yourself turning it over in your mind? People used to call those moments signs or portents. An animal behaving oddly, a sudden change in the weather, or some small event that seemed to fall outside the normal rhythm of life. Most of us probably notice things like that, shrug, and carry on. But every now and then, something happens that refuses to be forgotten. This happened to me when I was about 16. A few friends and I had arranged to meet at a traveling fair one Saturday evening. I arrived on time, waited near the entrance, and watched the crowds pour through the gates, but my friends never appeared. I was disappointed, of course, but I refused to let it ruin the night. I told myself I would have a good time without them, partly out of determination and partly out of pure stubbornness. After wandering past the flashing arcade machines and the spinning rides, I made my way to the dodgems, or bumper cars, as some people call them. The ride was surrounded by a circular queue several people deep. Before joining it, you had to buy a small orange plastic token from the operator. Then you waited for your chance to rush onto the track and claim a car. Whenever a session ended, the siren would sound, the cars would lose power, and the drivers would climb out. The next group rarely waited patiently. They would charge forward before the previous riders had fully cleared the track. There were always more people than cars, so anyone who failed to grab one had to return to the queue and try again. It reminded me of musical chairs, only with flashing lights, loud music, and people pretending not to shove each other. As I moved closer to the front, I began studying the cars. There were red ones, blue ones, green ones, and yellow ones. Most of them came in matching groups, but there was one silver-purple car sitting among them. Its paint sparkled beneath the fairground lights, and a large number 9 was painted on the front. I became strangely fixated on it. Perhaps it looked faster. Perhaps I simply liked the fact that it was different. Whatever the reason, I decided that I wanted that car and no other. By the time I reached the front row of the queue, I had made a private promise to myself. If somebody else reached the purple car first, I would step back, wait through another session, and try again. When the siren finally sounded, the cars rolled to a stop. Unfortunately, the purple one had stopped on the far side of the track, much closer to several other people than it was to me. The power was cut. Drivers began climbing out. I ran. I did not look left or right. I did not pay attention to anyone around me. I simply sprinted across the floor toward that purple car as fast as I could. Somehow, I reached it. I climbed inside, dropped my orange token into the slot, and gripped the steering wheel. I remember feeling ridiculously pleased with Motesters. Then I looked up. Every other car was empty. Not almost every car, every single one. No one else had entered the track. The crowd was still standing around the circular barrier. The people who had been pressing forward only moments earlier were now completely still, staring at me. They were not frozen. They were blinking, shifting their weight, and glancing at one another. But nobody stepped onto the track. The rest of the fair continued as normal. I could hear music from the carousel, laughter from somewhere behind me, and the distant mechanical roar of another ride. Yet around the Dodgems, everything had gone strangely quiet. I sagged there wondering whether I had broken some rule without realizing it. I looked down at myself, thinking perhaps something embarrassing had happened. But there was nothing unusual about me. I was just an ordinary teenager sitting in a bumper car. Until that moment, the crowd had been fighting for places. People had been squeezing past one another, watching for empty cars and preparing to run. Now they simply stood there. I looked toward the operator's booth. The man inside was staring at the crowd with the same confused expression I must have had. He looked at me, looked back at them, and raised his hand slightly, as though asking a question nobody could answer. After several uncomfortable seconds, he gave a small shrug, pulled a lever, and sounded the siren. The power came on. My car began to move. And so I drove the Dodgems entirely alone. At first, I went around the outside of the track. Then I began weaving between the abandoned cars, gently nudging one or two of them because there was nothing else to do. It should have been exciting. I had the entire ride to myself, including the exact car I had wanted. Instead, I felt exposed. Everyone watched as I drove around in slow circles. Nobody laughed or called out. Even the operator seemed unsure whether to be amused or concerned. That session felt much longer than the others, although perhaps time simply stretches when a crowd of strangers is silently watching you drive a bumper car by yourself. Eventually, the siren sounded again, and the power was cut. The moment my car stopped, the crowd surged forward. People rushed onto the track, scrambling for every available car. Several of them headed straight for the purple one before I had even climbed out. Everything was suddenly normal again. I stepped away from the car, crossed through the crowd, and left the ride without saying a word. I have thought about that evening many times since. Perhaps everyone in that group had also wanted the purple car and decided they would rather wait than take another one. But that explanation has never felt convincing. There were plenty of other cars, and until then, nobody had shown the slightest hesitation about taking whichever one they could reach. Why did every person stop at exactly the same moment? Why did no one move until my session was over? And why did the operator seem just as confused as I was? Maybe there is a perfectly ordinary explanation. Perhaps I missed something obvious in the excitement. But even now, all these years later, part of me wonders whether it was one of those strange little interruptions in reality. A modern sign. A quiet portent hidden beneath fairground music and flashing lights. Whatever it was, I have never forgotten the night when an entire crowd stepped back and left me alone on the Dodgems. Hey there, I want to share a story that's been with me for a long time. It's about a house on Alexandria Street in sunny Hollywood, California, back in the late 60s. My name's Brandy, and I was the youngest of 6 kids, 5 sisters and 1 brother, and we were all pretty well behaved, if I do say so myself. But there was something special, or maybe unusual, about our family. You see, Mom was a single parent who believed in us and supported our differences, especially when it came to things most folks wouldn't understand. She'd always say, "People don't like what they can't understand." And looking back, she was right. We were introduced to the paranormal early on. We lived in a downstairs duplex, and across the street was this grumpy old lady who lived in the back of her house. Her windows were always blacked out, and she'd yell at kids passing by, even popping our balls if they rolled into her driveway, and then laugh like it was the funniest thing. I tried to befriend her because I genuinely loved everyone, but she had a dark, unsettling vibe. One day, Mom told us we had to move because the owner of our duplex was getting a divorce and wanted her place back. Money was tight, but Mom worked 3 jobs and asked us to trust her. So, we'd pile into this big yellow station wagon at night to look at rentals. Sometimes doors were unlocked, and if they weren't, my older brother, always the protector, would help me climb through a window so I could open the door. Thinking back, that was probably trespassing. We finally moved to a big 2-story house right across the street from that old lady. It was bigger than our old place, with wood floors and a wraparound porch. There was a section in the back where the old lady lived separately, with her windows shaded. Mom rushed the move, saying it was a good deal and we couldn't pass it up. I wanted to check the house for anything strange first, but she was too busy. So, I went to explore on my own. When I got to the top of the stairs, something grabbed me, like 3 icy hands squeezing my throat so tight I couldn't scream. It felt like I was being pushed backward, teetering on the edge of the steps. I was terrified, thinking I'd fall, but somehow I was held there until a voice in my head told me, "You are strong. You have faith." I pictured a glowing white light and quietly said, "Om," the universal sound of peace. Slowly, the grip loosened enough for me to run to Mom and beg her to move back. But we had no choice. The house was ours. Soon, everyone started having strange experiences. My brother, who loved tinkering, set up a workshop in the basement. One day, I went down with my cat, Friska, looking for a toy. At the bottom of the stairs, the lights went out and the door slammed shut. I saw a dark, smoky shape blocking the moonlight and moving toward me. Friska hissed and jumped from my arms, running away. I scrambled upstairs, heart pounding, and finally got the door open. After that, my brother always kept the basement door locked. Our family was active in our temple, helping with events and shows. One day, after school, I was home alone and sat on the phone bench in the hallway, waiting for someone. Suddenly, I heard crackling noises upstairs, but no one answered when I called. Then, from behind the boarded-up wall next to the old lady's space, I heard a quiet, evil giggle. The crackling grew louder, and a deafening ringing filled my head. I looked up and saw a massive, glowing figure with hundreds of eyes, pulsating from red to amber, slowly gliding down the stairs toward me. A chilling cackle came from the wall, and I ran straight to a friend's house until someone came home. There was an event upstairs one night around 2 a.m. My brother burst into the room where my sisters were reading, pale and gasping for air. He told them to come downstairs immediately. He'd seen a hateful old man's spirit in his room who attacked him, choking him until he thought he'd pass out. The bruises from that night stayed on his neck for over a week, and he never slept upstairs again. My sister Rachel was skeptical until one day, while napping, she woke to find her finger sliced by the blades of an unplugged fan that somehow moved across the shag carpet to her bed. Despite all that, she kept sleeping up there until one night she was pinned down by a dark pressure. She prayed and said special words taught by our minister, and the weight lifted. After that, she joined the rest of us sleeping in the living room. Life in that house was a nightmare. The old lady tormented us whenever she could. She'd watch us through her screen door, had creepy dolls made from our trash stabbed with pins, and once, she appeared behind me with hateful eyes, grabbing my hand and warning me not to water the plants. My sister Charity had to chase her off. We later learned the house had a dark history. A man had hung himself on the stairs, and someone else had shot themselves in the upstairs closet. The old lady was known for drinking heavily and practicing dark arts, even voodoo, according to my brother and me. She kept her windows blacked out to keep the energy she wanted, and no one visited her. I sometimes wonder who she was before all that darkness took hold, and what made her so angry and cruel. Was the hateful spirit in my brother's room connected to her? Our minister told us the house couldn't be cleansed until she left. We only stayed 6 months, but those months left a mark on all of us. It was a time filled with fear, faith, and family sticking together through it all. Thanks for listening to my story. Hey, I want to share something that's been happening in our home. Something a bit unsettling, but very real to us. Since my partner switched to working the second shift, I started having our 2 little ones, my 3-year-old son CJ, and my 1-year-old daughter, sleep in bed with me. It's been comforting for all of us. But then, something happened that shook me to my core. Last Tuesday night, right at 11:30 p.m., CJ woke up crying and terrified. I asked him what was wrong, and instead of speaking, he kept pointing to the corner of the room. I pulled out my phone flashlight to see, but the corner stayed shrouded in darkness. CJ had never been that scared before, and honestly, I started feeling the fear too. I FaceTimed my partner, hoping to get some comfort. You know how your phone's flashlight usually turns off as soon as they pick up? Well, the moment it went off, CJ's fear escalated dramatically. He began to act as if whatever was there was moving closer, creeping towards the end of our bed. I could see the terror in his eyes as he tracked it inching nearer. He scrambled away from the bed's edge, screaming my name, desperate to escape this invisible threat. I was scared myself, so I turned on the TV to distract him. He calmed down a little, so I tried to open his favorite app. But just as it started loading, the screen went black again. The darkness returned, and so did CJ's panic, worse than before. Finally, I managed to get his favorite cartoon on, and he relaxed, cuddling up beside me until he fell asleep. When little ones are that scared, you have to believe them, you know? After that night, I kept the TV on until my partner got home from work to keep CJ calm. CJ sometimes wakes from night terrors and points to that corner, but this episode was different. It was worse than anything before. And here's the thing. That corner used to be where my daughter would smile and giggle, so it's strange that it's now the source of such fear for CJ. Since that night, almost every night at exactly 11:30 p.m., CJ wakes up crying, terrified of something at the end of our bed. It's so consistent it's almost chilling. Why always 11:30? What is haunting him? Last night he woke up scared again, but this time he was nodding, answering yes to whatever he was seeing. I truly believe he's seeing something that's terrifying him. This sensitivity seems to run in the family. My mom has always been able to sense spirits. She can walk into a house and tell you the kind and number of spirits there. My older brother has had his own strange experiences too. It feels like CJ has inherited this gift, and while I want to protect him, I also want this to stop. The bedroom feels heavy, like something's attached to that space. Our home has been in my partner's family for decades. His niece, now 18, used to talk to someone in that very same bedroom when she was little. His 5-year-old nephew calls out to someone named Abby there, and his 24-year-old brother once asked about an old man in the room, an old man who wasn't really there. We've had monks bless the house multiple times, but whatever this is, it keeps coming back. It's been a difficult, exhausting time, but sharing this with you helps a bit. Thanks for listening. I saw someone talking about their Ouija board experience recently, and it brought back something I've kept tucked away for a long time. There's a bit of background to it, and it starts with my best friend. For the sake of the story, I'll call her Joni. Joni's bedroom was in the basement of her mom's house, so whenever I went over, that's where we usually ended up hanging out. And I mean this sincerely, that basement never felt normal. The moment you started walking down those stairs, the air changed. It got colder, heavier somehow. You'd feel chills crawl up your arms before you even reached the bottom, and there was always this awful feeling that something had already noticed you. Even now, I would not go down there by myself. Not for anything. Joni had told me things before. She said that sometimes, at the foot of her bed, she would see this tall, shadowy figure standing there. And when I say tall, I mean impossibly tall. Like its head disappeared right into the ceiling. She also said she had woken up more than once halfway pulled off the end of her bed, like something had grabbed her and tried to drag her. Her mom had the room saged. They used holy water. Someone blessed the space. Joni even pinned a rosary to the wall right behind the spot where that figure usually stood. None of it changed anything. I believed her because she wasn't the kind of person to make things up. But there was still this tiny part of me wondering if there could be some other explanation. Sleep paralysis, bad dreams, shadows from outside, something like that. Then I slept over one night. We weren't even in her bedroom that time. We were sleeping on the couches in the main room of the basement. It had been a completely normal sleepover. We played games, watched a couple of movies, ate snacks, stayed up too late, all of that. Then sometime around 3 or 4 in the morning, I woke up, and there was something standing over me. I still don't have a better way to describe it than tall and shadowy. It was right there, looming over the couch, silent and dark. I froze. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared at it, trying to convince myself I wasn't seeing what I was seeing. After that, I couldn't really dismiss what Joni had been telling me. The next time I came over, I told her I could bring my Ouija board. My thinking was, if something happened, then something happened. And if nothing happened, then at least we'd tried. So we set it up in the basement. Before we started, we talked through the rules. We agreed to be respectful, not ask anything reckless, and to say goodbye properly when we were done. At first, nothing really happened. The planchette just sat there, and we sat there staring at it, waiting. Then the room started getting cold. Not just a little chilly either. It felt like the whole basement had tightened around us. Like every corner had eyes. I remember feeling watched from all sides, not just from one direction. Then the planchette moved to hello. Joni and I looked at each other immediately. You could tell we were both suspicious, like, okay, which one of us is doing this? But I knew I wasn't moving it, and the look on her face told me she wasn't either. She looked genuinely scared. We asked how old it was. It gave us 4 or 5. We asked if it was a boy or a girl. It said boy. At that point, we both stopped and asked each other again if either of us was moving it. We both said no. And I believed her. There was fear in her eyes, real fear, and I know what I felt under my own fingers. I wasn't pushing anything. Then we asked its name. It spelled out Zico. We asked how it died. It spelled fire. After that, we tried asking simple things. Favorite color, favorite food, easy questions, the kind of things you'd ask a child if you were trying to be gentle. But it didn't seem interested in that at all. A lot of the words came through misspelled, strange and broken. Then eventually, it just stopped answering altogether. The planchette went still. We thanked it, said goodbye, and ended the session. Afterward, Joni had the basement blessed again, but she was so shaken by the whole thing that, to this day, she will not touch a Ouija board, not even as a joke. Later on, we started looking into what had happened, and that made it worse. We read that spirits using names with the letter Z, presenting themselves as children, and spelling things incorrectly can show up in stories involving darker entities. I'm not saying that's definitely what it was, but it was enough to make both of us feel sick. Then someone we knew, who was really into paranormal stuff, said something that honestly bothered me more than anything else. She reminded us that spirits can lie, and somehow That made the whole experience feel even darker. Because whatever we spoke to in that basement, I don't think it was really a little boy named Zico. I want to tell you about something that happened to me when I was a kid, and honestly, even now, I still don't know exactly what to make of it. My great-grandparents on my mom's side had this beautiful old family property tucked up in the mountains of West Virginia. And when I say mountains, I really mean it. West Virginia sits right in the Appalachian Mountains, so everything there feels raised up, quiet, and old in a way that gets under your skin. The land had been in my family for generations. There was the main house where my great-grandparents lived, and then 2 trailers on the property that family used whenever people came to stay. There were also a couple of sheds, a garden, and a long slope leading up toward the main house. When I was about 8 years old, my mom drove me, my younger sister, and my grandma out there for a visit. We stayed in the trailer that faced the main house. That trailer had once belonged to my great-grandma's father, and pretty much everything inside was still his. The furniture, the layout, the whole feeling of the place had barely changed. After he passed away, the trailer was moved onto the family property. He had been a coal miner, a simple man from what I was always told. People in the family described him as kind, dependable, and deeply protective of the people he loved. I remember thinking, from the old photos and stories, that he looked a little like a gentler version of that creepy old neighbor from Monster House, only with softer eyes. After we unpacked, we went up to the main house for dinner. My great-grandma had cooked, and everyone sat around talking the way families do when there's nowhere else to be. She loved telling stories, especially strange ones. Ghost stories, family stories, stories that sat right on the line between memory and warning. That night, she told us about what everyone called the property ghost. She said that years before, she had been staying there to check on her mother, who owned the property before her. One day, while she was in the mudroom on the side of the main house, she saw an old man outside the window. He was wearing long red underwear, with his hands cupped around his eyes, peering inside like he was trying to see who was there. It scared her badly enough that she went outside to tell him to leave. But when she got out there, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. So she went to her mother's trailer and told her what had happened. Her mother just smiled and said it was her grandpa watching over the land, checking to see who would take care of it next. And that became the family story. If you saw him watching you, it meant you might be the next one meant to inherit the property. A few days into our stay, my sister and I spent most of the afternoon in the trailer. We watched movies on this old box television, played around on a broken exercise machine, and colored in coloring books we had brought with us. After a while, we got bored and, for some reason kids do things like this, decided to pretend we were housekeepers. We found cleaning supplies and started sweeping, mopping, and wiping down counters. We even turned on the old radio and found a classic rock station while we worked. Eventually, I got a bad cramp in my leg, so I went to lie down in the bedroom where my mom had been sleeping. My sister kept cleaning for a little while, then turned off the radio and came to sit with me. We colored and talked for a bit until she decided to head up to the main house. I would have gone with her, but my leg still hurt, so I stayed behind. At first, I didn't mind being alone. The trailer was quiet, and I was sitting against the headboard, coloring in my book. I remember setting down a blue crayon and picking up a green one. And then, I heard a man's voice call my name. I looked up right away. It sounded like it came from the far end of the trailer, near the bedroom where my sister and I were staying, close to the front door. A few seconds passed, and then, the same voice said my name again. Only this time, it sounded closer. At first, I thought maybe my sister had come back and was trying to scare me, so I called out to her and told her I was going to tell Mom if she didn't stop. Then the voice said my name again. Closer. This time, it sounded like it was coming from the kitchen and living room area. That was when I knew it wasn't my sister. The voice came one more time, right outside the bedroom door. I screamed and jumped up. As I ran for the door, the radio suddenly turned on by itself. It was playing the same classic rock station my sister and I had been listening to earlier. I screamed even louder while trying to shove my shoes on and tie them. Over the radio, I could still hear that man's voice calling my name, and now it sounded like it was coming from the bedroom I had just run out of. The music got louder. The voice got louder. As soon as my shoes were tied, I bolted out of that trailer. I didn't care about the cramp in my leg anymore. I ran up the hill toward the main house as fast as I could, with the radio still blaring behind me. I never looked back. Not once. When I got inside the main house, everyone was in the kitchen eating dinner. I was shaking, out of breath, and terrified. Once I calmed down enough to explain what happened, my great-grandma told me something that made my stomach twist a little. She said they had just been talking about the man who used to own that trailer. My great-great-grandfather. That helped me calm down a little, because I wanted to believe it was him. I wanted to believe he had only been saying my name, not trying to scare me. But after that, I refused to stay in that trailer alone. Later that night, I went back down with my mom, my sister, and my grandma. When we opened the door, all the lights were on, and the radio was still blasting. My mom went over and shut it off like it was nothing, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Before bed, my sister, my grandma, and I watched a movie while my mom slept in the room where I had heard the voice. I tried to forget about what happened, but I was still nervous. Eventually, my grandma got tired and settled onto the couch, so my sister and I went to our room. Somehow, I fell asleep. But in the middle of the night, I woke up. I don't know what woke me. There was no loud sound, no movement, nothing obvious. I just had this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I looked over at my sister's bed, and she was asleep. The room was quiet. Nobody was inside with us. I rolled over, trying to calm myself down and go back to sleep. That was when I saw something at the window. The blinds were broken, so they only partly covered the glass. Through them, I could see a pair of eyes looking in. They weren't staring directly at me. It was more like they were looking over the whole room, slowly taking it in. And behind the eyes, I could make out the faint shape of red. I pulled the covers over my head and froze. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. I stayed like that for what felt like forever until I finally got brave enough to peek out again. The eyes were gone. Eventually, I fell asleep. I never told anyone about that part. I wasn't sure if it had really happened or if it had been some kind of nightmare. Honestly, I'm still not completely sure. But part of me thinks those eyes belonged to the property ghost. Maybe he was just watching over the place. Maybe he was checking on us. Maybe he was trying to let me know he was still there. It's been years now, and I've gone back to that property many times. Nothing like that has ever happened again. But I've never forgotten the voice in the trailer. And I've never forgotten those eyes at the window. Hey there. I want to share some experiences that have really stuck with me over the years. They're about things most people don't see, but sometimes, if you're lucky or unlucky, you might just catch a glimpse. In my culture, we call these beings jinn, kind of like ghosts, but not quite. They aren't spirits of the dead. They're something else entirely. What's fascinating is that children and animals can sometimes sense them when they choose to reveal themselves. They can even shapeshift or mimic voices, and sometimes they visit us in dreams, often as nightmares. The first time I encountered one was when I was about 4, with my older brother Sammy, who was 6 then. We lived in this small house, and one night, while lying in bed with our mom, we heard this eerie scraping noise. We looked up and saw 3 scratch marks slowly appearing on the ceiling, as if made by claws. Mom held us close, and the sound stopped after a few seconds. You might think it was something outside, maybe the roof, but our house was built with thick concrete. The marks seemed to form inside the ceiling itself. The next day, when Mom told Dad, he shared that he'd woken up a few nights earlier feeling uneasy. He'd seen a small, shadowy figure dart out of the room quickly, almost floating. For months after, I'd wake up to those marks every morning. Even now, Mom and Sammy remember it vividly. The second encounter happened in a bigger house we moved into later. I was lying on my stomach watching TV near the edge of the bed, and the door was open to my right. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a strange figure, a pale, hairless person without eyebrows, slowly peeking one eye into the room. When I looked directly, the figure quickly pulled back and disappeared. I checked the hallway, but no one was there. I asked Mom, who was in the far room ironing clothes, if she was spying on us. She said no, but I knew she wasn't telling the truth. My little brother once told me he followed Mom toward the ironing room, calling her, but she ignored him and seemed to vanish when she entered. Peeking inside, he found the room empty and felt too uneasy to go in alone. It was unsettling, to say the least. Then there's the story from London. My husband and I lived in a big Victorian townhouse, sharing it with 2 other couples because, well, London prices. Strange things happened, doors opening on their own, noises in the attic, but the most chilling was the humming ghost. One evening, while my husband was showering downstairs humming Greensleeves, I went upstairs to use the bathroom. Suddenly, I dropped my phone, and his humming stopped as if he heard it. Then it started again, louder and faster. When he finished, I told him I heard him humming downstairs. He was confused, saying he hadn't been humming, but that he heard someone humming upstairs, where I was. We realized something was mimicking our voices, aware of our actions. Another night, our cat started acting strange, arching her back and staring at a corner in the kitchen. I felt a chill as I entered, and then the humming began again. This time a rhythmic, pained, feminine sound with no recognizable tune. There was no one else there, no electronics making noise. The cat snapped out of it and ran off, and I didn't hesitate to follow, fleeing back to bed. I also want to share a strange walk home in Melbourne during lockdown. My friend and I took a shortcut down a rarely used dirt road around 1 a.m. We saw human-shaped figures pacing near a street sign. One disappeared, and the other moved oddly under the streetlight before vanishing completely. We shone our phone torches but found no sign anyone had been there. It was unsettling, especially during lockdown when almost no one was out. Lastly, a story from a house where I lived with my mom and brother. An old couple had passed away there before us. The basement, which my dad and I had set up as my extra room, had a separate outside door. One evening, my friend and I were watching movies downstairs alone. At about 8:15 p.m., we heard the front door open, footsteps, and chairs moving upstairs. We thought Mom was home bringing snacks. Then my phone rang. It was Mom, stuck at work due to a security problem, not home yet. Both my friend and I were terrified because only Mom and I had keys, and my brother was at Grandma's. We checked the house. Everything was locked and dark, just as we left it. Thinking back, all those noises I'd heard alone in the basement might have been real after all, not just my imagination. These experiences have stayed with me, sometimes haunting me, sometimes just reminding me that there's more to this world than meets the eye. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone when you thought you were? Hey there. I want to share a pretty wild story that happened back in 2018 when I was living in a small house with my mom, my younger brother, and our pets. Now, this wasn't just any house. It was one that my older sister, who has this unique ability to see and feel spirits, said was home to 4 very distinct spirits. There was a little boy spirit, probably around 7 or 8 years old, a woman who appeared to my sister in a very vulnerable state, like she died suddenly while changing clothes, a playful young man who liked to pull pranks, and then a dark, hard-to-read presence that gave everyone the creeps. Okay, so here's where things get strange. We had a super energetic yellow lab named Max. Max had terrible separation anxiety, so whenever I had to leave the house, I'd lock my bedroom door to keep him out because I didn't want him messing with some personal stuff I had. I'd leave him in the living room or hallway just outside my room, and to confuse him a bit, I'd sneak out through my window instead of the front door. Weird, I know, but it helped keep him calm. One day, I went out for a few hours. When I came back, the front door was locked, so I climbed back in through my window like usual, but I noticed right away that my curtains had been pulled aside, like someone had been looking in or out. I stepped into my room and, honestly, I was shocked. The whole place was a mess. Posters and records ripped off the walls, curtains torn down, my glass pieces and bongs tipped over but somehow not broken. And Max? He was just sitting quietly in the middle of the chaos, looking completely calm. I was baffled because Max was normally this bundle of energy who couldn't stay still, and he definitely wouldn't just sit there in such a wrecked room. Plus, my bedroom door had been locked before I left, yet it was unlocked when I came back. There were no signs of doggy destruction like bite marks or paw prints anywhere. I thought maybe my brother had let Max in to mess with me, but my brother wasn't home that day and swore he had nothing to do with it. When I told my family what happened, they thought it was probably one of our friends. That's what we called the spirits living in the house, playing some kind of prank or just making their presence felt. It was like they were blaming Max for the chaos, but I knew deep down it wasn't him. That night was the most intense experience I had in that room. After that, we decided to bless the house, and eventually, we moved out. My sister ended up moving in with her family and took over that very room. Even now, years later, I'm still trying to figure out which spirit was behind that strange night. It's a story that stuck with me, and I thought you might appreciate hearing it. This happened quite a few years back now. I want to say it was maybe 12 or 13 years ago. So I'll be honest, a few of the details are a little hazy. But the parts that mattered, those have stayed with me. I remember one evening, I was scrolling through Facebook when I came across an advert for a ghost hunting night inside an old jail in Scotland. It was only a few hours away from where I lived, and I'd always been curious about that sort of thing, so I thought, why not? I booked myself a place. The event was in Jedburgh, down in the Scottish borders, not too far from England. I hadn't heard of the group running it before, so I did a bit of digging first. Their reviews were good, and people seemed to say their events weren't staged or overdone. Supposedly, what happened on the night was just what happened. That made me feel a bit better about going. So on the night itself, I set off around 5:30, thinking I'd have more than enough time to get there before the investigation started at 9. The drive down was beautiful, all those winding roads and darkening hills, proper Scottish countryside. But, true to form, I still managed to arrive late. I blamed the sat-nav, naturally. When I pulled up, the jail looked grim right away. Big, dark, and heavy-looking, like it had been waiting there for years with its teeth clenched. It was Jedburgh Jail, and it had a pretty brutal history behind it. I'm sure it's been featured on a few paranormal TV shows as well, though I take most of those with a very large pinch of salt. Maybe a whole salt cellar. Everyone else had already parked by the time I arrived, so yes, I was the last one there. Typical. One of the team members came out to meet me and took me inside. I had to sign a book first, which was apparently required by the people who owned the building. After that, I was led through to the main hall where everyone else was waiting. There were more people than I expected. They'd come from different parts of the UK, which surprised me. I think there were maybe 7 or 8 members of the ghost hunting team, plus a psychic. I don't really believe in psychics, if I'm honest, but I decided to keep an open mind for the night. Before we started, they explained that we'd be split into 3 groups so we could cover different parts of the jail. Then the psychic said he wanted to do a blessing for protection before we began. He said anyone who didn't want to take part could step outside and wait until it was over. So I stepped outside. I didn't really want any part of it. Whether that was sensible or not, I still wonder about it sometimes. There was a table in the middle of the hall covered in equipment we could use during the investigation. EMF meters, torches, dowsing rods, radios, things like that. After the introduction, my group headed into the male wing of the jail. That part of the building was meant to be one of the most active areas. We climbed a set of stairs that didn't exactly inspire confidence. They looked old, worn, and not particularly safe. When we reached the top, we entered the male wing, and the atmosphere changed straight away. It was dark, neglected, and cold in that way old buildings can be. There were rows of cells, each with these big, heavy iron doors. The first thing we did was a Ouija board session in one of the cells. I can't remember the number of the cell now, but I volunteered to help, along with a woman in our group called Leah. We sat there and started calling out, asking if anyone was with us. Very original, I know, but honestly, nothing happened. The glass didn't move. Nobody felt anything. No knocks, no whispers, no sudden dramatic moment. It was just quiet. Eventually, we stopped because there didn't seem to be any point carrying on. One of the team members said he'd been doing ghost hunts for years and admitted that, most of the time, not much actually happened. He said he had seen a few things over the years that kept him interested, but he wouldn't tell us what they were. I remember thinking the money probably helped too. Since our group was the first in the male wing, we were told we could go into the cells and investigate on our own if we wanted. I went into one of them with what I think was an EMF meter. I switched it on, walked around a bit, and got absolutely nothing. Not even a flicker. To be fair, I had no idea if I was using it properly, so I might not have been the best investigator in the world. We spent about an hour in that wing, and nothing happened. No footsteps, no bangs, no voices, nothing. Eventually, we left so another group could have a turn. We went back to the main hall, where the psychic was using dowsing rods. He asked for a volunteer, and a woman went up to help him. He explained how they were supposed to work, but I wasn't convinced. They just looked too easy to influence, even without meaning to. After a while, the rods did move in her hands, and I'll admit it was interesting to watch, but I still wasn't sold. During that session, the psychic suddenly asked if anyone could smell something sweet, like perfume, in the room. Quite a few people said they could. I couldn't smell anything, but my sense of smell is terrible, so I couldn't really say either way. Maybe it was something strange. Maybe it was suggestion. I honestly don't know. After that, we had a break. There was food and juice laid out, and I remember sitting there feeling disappointed. Up to that point, it had been a bit flat. I'd driven all that way, and nothing had really happened. But the night wasn't finished with me yet. After the break, we headed into the women's wing. Another group was already there, so we joined up with them. At one point, I asked if I could be locked inside one of the cells on my own for about 10 minutes. They agreed. So there I was, locked in this old cell, in total darkness. I couldn't see a thing. I used my torch just enough to make sure I wasn't going to trip over anything. Then I turned on one of the devices they'd given me. It scanned radio frequencies, the kind of thing people use to pick up voices during investigations. At first, there was nothing, just dead air. I switched it off and sat there quietly for a few minutes. Then I turned it back on. This time, a voice came through. I couldn't make out what it said. I wouldn't even pretend I could. But it was definitely a voice, and it hadn't been there before. That got my attention. It didn't prove anything, but sitting alone in a pitch-black jail cell and suddenly hearing a voice through a device is not something you just shrug off. When my time was up, they let me out, and I found the rest of the group crowded around another cell. I could hear shouting, excitement, even a bit of screaming from inside. I couldn't get in because there were too many people already packed in there. Apparently, there was a table inside the cell, and it had started moving while the group was around it. I didn't see it myself, which is a shame. I only heard the reaction. But it did make me wonder if the voice I'd heard and whatever happened with that table were somehow connected. I can't say they were, but the timing was strange. After that, we had another break. People were buzzing, but some were genuinely shaken. A few were so scared they actually left the jail altogether. You could feel the mood had changed. Earlier, people had been joking and laughing. Now everyone was speaking a bit quieter. For the final hour, we were told we could go wherever we wanted in the building. I decided to go back to the male wing with my group. We stood in the corridor outside the cells, just listening. And this is the part that truly frightened me. I heard a growl right beside my left ear. Not from down the corridor, not from another room, right beside my ear. It sounded like someone had leaned in close, someone I couldn't see, and growled directly at me. I jumped straight away. My first thought was that I must have imagined it. Maybe it was the building settling. Maybe it was someone nearby. Then it happened again. I looked around and there was no one there. Nobody close enough to have done it. No explanation that made sense to me. That was the moment the night stopped being just interesting and became genuinely frightening. I can still remember that sound, even now. It wasn't loud, exactly. It was close. That was the worst part. It felt personal. When the investigation ended, I left the jail feeling unsettled. On the drive home, I nearly ended up in a car accident. I managed to avoid it, thankfully, but it shook me badly. Do I think something followed me out of that jail? I don't know. Part of me wants to say no, because that sounds ridiculous. But after what I heard in that corridor, I can't completely dismiss it either. All I know is this. I went in expecting very little, maybe hoping to be entertained. I left with a sound in my memory that still makes me uneasy. I was in my 20s, working in hotel management at a small boutique hotel in Buenos Aires. Around that time, one of our guests asked if we knew anyone who could read tarot cards. My manager ended up finding someone through a friend of a friend. This was late 2007. My best friend Leah and I were both working at the hotel, and the whole thing caught our curiosity. So we arranged for the woman to come to my apartment about a month later, in mid-January, while my parents were out. Leah went first. Then it was my turn. I sat down with a pretty clear mind. I wasn't expecting anything dramatic, honestly. It wasn't my first time trying tarot, but the first time had been with a friend who was mostly practicing. I still sometimes wonder if I should have listened more carefully to what I was told back then, but that's another story. The woman's name was Rosaria. She started by asking questions, checking little details, and looking over our birth charts, which she had prepared beforehand. Everything felt normal enough until she saw the cards I had chosen. Then she gasped. I raised an eyebrow. She looked at me and said, "Death is all around you." I'll be honest, I kind of laughed. Not loudly, but enough for her to know I wasn't exactly buying it. She asked if anyone in my family was ill. I said yes. My grandfather wasn't doing well, and in a sad way, we were already half expecting that phone call. She nodded, but then said she could see several deaths in the family. Again, I raised an eyebrow. This was a Monday afternoon in late January. By Wednesday, I had mostly forgotten about it. Then Friday came. My great-aunt, my grandfather's eldest sister, passed away. Nobody had expected it. She was 93, yes, but she had been in decent health for her age, so it still caught everyone off guard. The next week, I found out that one of my mother's cousins had died. She had been dealing with health problems for a while, and we weren't especially close, but still, it was another death in the family. Then, by the third week, my grandfather passed too. By mid-February, it honestly felt like relatives were just falling one after another. After that, I told myself I would take tarot seriously. Part of me wishes I had kept that promise in a healthier way. There were times later when I used it like a life raft, and I'm not exactly proud of that. A few months later, in early November, just weeks before my birthday, I was in a very different kind of emotional mess. I'm gay, and my first real relationship had just ended after I found out I was being cheated on. Coming out hadn't made things easier with my parents either. Work gave me some stability, especially because I was finally doing something I liked, but deep down, I just wanted to fall in love again. So I called Rosaria. I asked her about love. Her answer shocked me and amused me at the same time. She said, "Well, you're not going to stay single for long." I asked, "Really? How?" She paused and said, "It's not completely clear." I said, "I don't follow." Then she said, "It says you already know of this person." I remember saying, "What?" She said, "Yes, you know about him. You're aware of him somehow, but you haven't actually met." I just sat there like, okay. Then she added, "You're going to meet him either 1 week before your birthday or 1 week after it." I know that probably doesn't make sense right now. And no, it really didn't. Here's where it gets strange. A friend of mine had a birthday 2 days before mine, and that year he sent the invitation by email. Very 2007. He also forgot to hide everyone's addresses, which I was not thrilled about, because I didn't love the idea of random people having my contact information. These were still the MSN Messenger days, so naturally, a couple of days later, someone added me. I didn't recognize the email address, but I accepted anyway. I probably didn't make the best first impression, because I sent him a very dry message that said, "Do I know you?" This happened just days before my 24th birthday. About a week later, he finally came online. We started talking. He wasn't exactly delighted by my first message, which, fair enough. But as we kept chatting, he mentioned a few things that started ringing bells in my head. At one point I asked, "Are you Buddhist or something like that?" He said, "I'm Hinduist. How do you know that?" Then I asked, "And you used to play piano, or maybe you still do?" He answered, "Yes. Again, how do you know that?" That was when it clicked. I said, "I can't believe this. Are you Nico's ex?" He absolutely panicked. He wrote something like, "Who are you? How do you know that? Please explain." The problem was, I was at work. I had just gotten my food, and I only had a few minutes to eat before going back to my shift. I worked from 3 in the afternoon until midnight at the hotel then. So I told him, "Please wait. My food just arrived and I have only a few minutes to eat before I need to keep working. If you're not here when I come back, I promise I'll send you an email explaining everything." He said, Okay, go." Now, to explain properly, I have to go back to June of that same year. I had met his ex-boyfriend, Nico. We didn't click at all. I found him kind of obnoxious, honestly. But he talked a lot about his ex. A lot. And the more he talked about him, the more I kept thinking, his ex actually sounds really interesting. If only I could get his contact information, at least I'd get something good out of this. But I never asked. Still, some part of me remembered. So after my food break, I came back. We kept talking. Eventually, we met in person, and we dated for 2 years. So when I think back on what Rosaria said, it still gives me chills. I did know of him, but I didn't know him. He added me just days before my birthday, and we actually talked properly exactly a week after my birthday. I swear I'm not making this up. I need to tell you about something that happened to me a few years back when I was working as an electrician in India. I had just come home after nearly 3 weeks of work in another town. I was exhausted, honestly. I remember thinking I would eat, wash up, and sleep like a stone. But that evening, maybe around 6 o'clock, my phone rang. It was an elderly woman. Her voice was soft, but very clear. She said there was some electrical trouble in her house and asked if I could come take a look. So I went. The moment I reached the house, something felt off. Not frightening at first, just empty. There was no sound from inside, no television, no radio, no people talking nearby. Even the street outside felt strangely still. She opened the door and led me straight to the main electrical board. She told me the lights had been flickering and sometimes cutting out completely. I started checking the wiring. After a few minutes, I turned my head a little, just by instinct. She was standing right behind me, smiling. But it wasn't the kind of smile that makes you feel welcome. It was too wide, too fixed, like her face had forgotten how to stop. I looked away quickly and kept working. Then she left without saying a word. I told myself she was just lonely. Maybe old people do strange things when they live alone for too long. That's what I wanted to believe. After a while, she came back and asked if I wanted water or tea. I said tea. When she returned with it, she sat nearby and started talking about her son. She said he lived in Canada and called her often on the landline. She said sometimes they talked for hours. But while she was speaking, her face was turned away from me the whole time. And her voice. I don't know how to explain this properly. It didn't feel like it was coming from her mouth. It felt like it was coming from somewhere else in the room. I didn't say anything. I just drank the tea, put the cup down, and went back to work. By then, the evening had become night. I was still trying to find the fault. Around 9:30, the whole house suddenly went dark. I used my torch and kept checking the main box. That's when I heard whispering. From inside the electrical board. I stopped moving. I listened. There it was again. A low whisper. Not clear enough to understand, but clear enough to know it was real. At first, I thought the old woman was standing on the other side of the wall, trying to scare me, so I forced myself to ignore it and kept working. After a long time, I finally fixed the problem. The lights came back on. I felt so relieved. I turned to her and said, "It's done. The fault is fixed." It was close to 11 at night by then, and all I wanted was to get paid and leave. She told me the money was in the storage room. Then she asked me to help her move a trunk first. I followed her. She opened the trunk. Inside was the body of an old man. It was rotting. The smell hit me so hard I almost fell backward. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My hands went cold. My mind just shut down. Then I ran. But before I reached the front door, she grabbed my shirt. Her grip was impossible. Too strong for someone her age. She looked straight into my eyes and asked very calmly, "So tell me, what was wrong in the box?" I could barely answer. "Nothing," I said. Nothing was wrong. My voice was shaking so badly I hardly recognized it. She stared at me for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down. I'll bring your money." And she walked away. That was when I saw the landline phone. My hands were trembling, but I picked it up and dialed the same number she had called me from. Then I shouted as loud as I could, "Your son is calling you." She turned immediately and rushed toward the other room. I didn't wait even 1 second. I ran out of that house and didn't stop until I reached home. When I told my parents what happened, they didn't react at first. They just looked at each other. Then my father said something that still follows me. "That's not possible." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Her husband has been missing for almost 3 weeks. My chest tightened. Then he looked at me and said, "And that old woman died 10 days ago." I couldn't speak. I finally asked, "How?" My father lowered his voice and said, "Electric shock." Then he paused. "From the main electrical board." Hey there. I want to share a little story from my childhood, something that's been witnessed not just by me, but by a couple of others in my family. It's about a shadow figure we kept seeing in our old house. Now, whether you believe in ghosts or just coincidences, I hope you'll find this story interesting. So, the first time I saw this shadow was when I was a kid, maybe around 9 or 10 years old. Our upstairs had 3 rooms side by side: the bathroom, the bedroom my sister and I shared, and my parents' room. One evening, while I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure out of the corner of my eye. It looked like it was doing a trust fall, falling backward with arms outstretched, and it landed right onto my mom's bed in the next room. At first, I was pretty scared, but told myself it was just my imagination. I saw it a few more times after that, but didn't say anything to my parents because they didn't really believe me. Then one night, when my parents were out at a New Year's party, my sister and I were home alone. She's about 8 years older than me, so she was sort of like the babysitter. We were in the kitchen making sandwiches when I noticed the shadow again, sitting on the couch in the living room. I told my sister and asked her to back away slowly without looking directly at it, because I had learned that if you looked straight at it, it would disappear. She did, and to my surprise, she saw it too. She said it looked like it had wings, which I hadn't noticed before. It was kind of exciting and frightening all at once to finally have someone else see it with me. Later on, when my friend came over for a sleepover, we made a bed on the living room floor with blankets and were having a pillow fight. Suddenly, he stopped and dropped his pillow with a scared look on his face. I asked what was wrong, and he said he saw a man dressed all in black standing in the other room, the same shadow figure we had been seeing. That moment really made me think maybe it wasn't just my imagination anymore. Years later, I found out that the bed where the shadow often appeared originally belonged to a friend of my mom's, and it had once belonged to her friend's father, who had passed away in that very bed. Maybe it's all a coincidence, but those memories have stayed with me. Even now, as an adult, I'm still skeptical about the paranormal, but I kind of look forward to experiencing something like that again, as strange as that might sound. I still think about this almost every night. This happened about 2 months ago, on Easter morning, right around 3 a.m. And honestly, even talking about it now gives me chills. At the time, I was living with my mom and stepdad. They're both really careful about security. I mean, almost overly careful. We have motion cameras around the house, multiple locks on every door, those metal security bars that wedge under the handles, the whole setup. so the house always felt safe, locked down, quiet. My bedroom is down in the basement, and my mom and stepdad usually go to bed pretty early, around 10:30. That night, I was still awake playing League of Legends with some friends. I'd been on since around midnight, and nothing felt strange at all. It was just a normal late-night gaming session. Then, right around 3 a.m., I heard 3 loud knocks on my bedroom door. Clear knocks. Not random creaking, not pipes, not the house settling. 3 deliberate knocks. Then, silence. At first, I thought it had to be my mom or my stepdad coming downstairs to tell me I was being too loud. I even thought I heard footsteps walking away afterward, so I didn't panic right away. I just lowered my voice and started whispering to my friends on Discord. I figured, okay, maybe I woke them up, no big deal. But about 15 minutes later, it happened again. 3 knocks. This time, I waited a few seconds, then opened the door. Nobody was there, just the dark basement family room staring back at me. I told myself maybe my stepdad had knocked and already gone back upstairs. I tried to brush it off, but it didn't really make sense. My mom and stepdad aren't the type to come downstairs in the middle of the night. If they ever need me to quiet down, they usually text me. They definitely don't creep down to the basement at 3 in the morning. So I went back to my game. Then it happened again. Maybe 12 minutes later. 3 more knocks. I opened the door immediately this time. Again, nothing. Just darkness. That's when I closed my bedroom door and locked it. And I'm not going to lie, I was terrified. My mom and stepdad are in their late 60s. They don't play pranks, and they definitely wouldn't do something like that in the middle of the night. My mind started racing. Maybe someone had gotten into the house somehow. Maybe it was a burglar. Maybe one of my friends had planned some insane prank. But the knocks kept happening. Every 10 to 15 minutes. Always 3 knocks. This went on for almost 2 hours. Then, around 5 a.m., it happened again, but this time it was different. There were 3 knocks, then a pause, maybe 20 seconds, then another 3 knocks, but much faster and harder, more aggressive. It felt like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side really wanted me to open that door. By then, I was completely shaken. And the strangest part was that my friends on Discord heard it too. My microphone picked it up every time. At first, they thought I was messing with them, but after it kept happening, they started telling me to call my mom. I didn't want to wake her up. My stepdad gets really irritated if he's woken up, and I kept trying to convince myself that maybe there was some normal explanation. But eventually, I just couldn't take it anymore. I called my mom. When she answered, I asked her if she or my stepdad had been coming downstairs and knocking on my door. She said no. They had both been asleep the entire time. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I told her I thought someone might be in the house, and I asked them to come downstairs so we could search together. We checked every room, every corner, every possible place someone could hide. Nothing. No open doors, no broken windows, no sign that anyone had been inside. Then we checked the security cameras. The footage showed me going into my room earlier that night. Later, it showed my mom and stepdad coming downstairs after I called them. But during the entire time the knocking was happening, the cameras showed nothing. No movement. No person. No shadow crossing the hallway. Nothing at all. That's when the whole thing stopped feeling like a break-in and started feeling like something else. My mom told me I was completely pale when she came downstairs. She said I looked like I'd seen something I couldn't explain. And honestly, that's exactly how it felt. Afterward, we prayed over the house. Since that morning, it has never happened again. But whenever I'm awake around 3 a.m., I still think about it. I still remember sitting there, listening for the next 3 knocks, wondering what was standing outside my door. The weird thing is, I never felt some overwhelming sense of evil. It didn't feel peaceful either, though. It just felt unknown, neutral, like something was there, but I couldn't understand what it wanted. To this day, I don't have an explanation. Part of me thinks it was a ghost. Part of me wonders if the pattern of 3 knocks means something, because it happened over and over again, always the same way. I've only had one other experience that felt truly otherworldly, but that one was completely different. It felt spiritual, loving, almost Christ-like. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever felt, and I still don't know how to describe it properly. But this was not like that. This was Easter morning, before sunrise, alone in a basement bedroom, listening to something knock on my door again and again. And I still don't know what was on the other side. I still think about this sometimes, even though it happened way back in the early 2000s. Before I get into it, I should probably say that my dreams are usually nonsense. They jump around, they don't follow any real story, and they almost never involve people I actually know. So this one stayed with me because it was completely different. At the time, I was working as an ICU nurse at a major hospital. We took care of some of the sickest patients in the region. People came to us in the worst possible condition, and unfortunately, we did lose patients. Septic shock, organ failure, massive complications. Death was part of the job, even though that never made it easy. One day, I got a new patient admitted to the unit. His name was Daniel. He was fairly young, probably in his 30s, and he had come in with a serious gastrointestinal bleed after what sounded like a rough holiday weekend of drinking and partying. When he arrived, he was already on a ventilator, but at first, that was mostly to protect his airway because of the bleeding. We honestly expected him to pull through. He didn't have family nearby, but he did have friends who cared about him and checked in. Still, things started going wrong in a way none of us really expected. His liver began to fail, and once that happened, the situation became almost impossible. A transplant wasn't an option for him. Eventually, his family, who lived out of state, agreed to stop aggressive treatment. I was working the night his condition took a sharp turn. He started bleeding heavily, and at that point, there was nothing left to do except make him comfortable. I was still a young nurse then. I was capable, and I understood the medicine, but I remember feeling so confused by how quickly everything had fallen apart. He died at the exact minute my shift ended, and the only people with him when he passed were us nurses. I had seen death before. I had learned how to put those feelings into a box so I could keep doing my job and not carry every loss home with me. But Daniel stayed with me. I kept thinking about him. I kept wondering whether his family had given up too soon, even though logically, I knew his prognosis was terrible. I wondered why no one came to sit with him. Was there distance between them? Pain? Judgment? Were they estranged? I wondered if we had missed something, or if there was anything more we could have done. I was busy then, constantly working, traveling, juggling too much at once. Life kept moving, because it always does. But underneath all of it, that quiet ache stayed with me. Then, a few weeks after he died, I had the most vivid dream I have ever had. I remember the sensation of sitting up in bed, not just dreaming that I was sitting up, but feeling it. The dream began with me back in the ICU. The phone at the nurse's station rang, that old landline sound cutting through the room. I picked it up. It was Daniel. I remember saying, "How are you calling me? You passed away." And he answered so calmly. He said he had ways of doing it. I asked him a few things, but he didn't really linger there. He got straight to the point. He told me he knew I had been upset. He knew I had been carrying questions about him, and he had come specifically to reassure me. He told me very clearly that he was happy where he was. He said the way everything happened in the end was okay. Completely okay. There was no fear in him, no sadness, no blame. Just this steady, peaceful certainty. At the time, the only way I understood what he was describing was heaven. So I asked him, in my own way, if that was where he was. And he confirmed it. He said it was wonderful. The strangest part is that I had never actually spoken to him while he was alive. He had been unconscious the whole time I cared for him. I didn't know his voice. I didn't know his personality. But in the dream, he felt so real. Calm, gentle, mellow. Like someone who had no need to prove anything because he already knew he was safe. That dream was more vivid than any dream I had before or since. Even more vivid than a dream I once had about my grandmother after she passed. It didn't feel like my usual dreams at all. It felt almost like I was awake, sitting there, having an actual conversation with him. And after that, the distress I had been carrying was gone. I never had that same anguish about his death again. Not once. Maybe it was just my mind processing grief and guilt in the only way it knew how. Maybe my brain built a door so I could finally walk out of that room. But honestly, it didn't feel like that. It felt like a visit. And whatever it was, I hope it was. Because if it was truly Daniel, then I know he was at peace. You know, my Aunt Lila used to live in this old farmhouse that was pretty much stuck in time. No electricity, no plumbing, no heating, definitely no air conditioning. She told me about this little wood-burning cast iron stove they had, the kind with 4 burners covered by lids. I picture it being pretty small because they used to haul it outside during the summer, but when winter rolled around, they'd bring it back in. Not just for cooking, but for warmth too. And funny enough, the stove spot was right in the room where Aunt Lila slept. One summer night, she woke up to this strange clattering noise in her room. She lit up her old kerosene lamp brighter and looked around. The burner lids on the stove were rattling. But here's the kicker, it was summer, and the stove should have been outside. There it was, just the stove itself, no stovepipe, and the front was glowing like it was blazing hot. Then, out of nowhere, a ball of flame shot up through where the stovepipe should have connected. It floated up to the ceiling and swayed back down into the stove like it was dancing, trailing this smoky green glow behind it. Suddenly, the lamp sputtered and died, plunging the room into total darkness. No flame, no glow, no smoke, just the rattling noise. Aunt Lila quickly relit the lamp, and everything vanished back into place. The stove, the glow, the whole scene. Her mother had heard the noise and came in to check on her. As soon as the door opened, everything stopped. The stove disappeared, and the noise stopped. Her mom asked what all the racket was about, but Aunt Lila was too stunned to answer at first. Eventually, she told her everything. Her mother's face went cold, and she just said, "Ignore it, it can't hurt you," before leaving and closing the door behind her. Once the door slammed shut, the strange happening started all over again. Aunt Lila blew out her lamp and shouted, "I am not afraid of you," before burying herself under her covers. That rattling went on for what felt like an hour before it finally quieted down. Now, on a different note, when I was a kid, I had this deep anxiety about sleep and windows. Probably because our neighbor, who struggled with alcoholism, used to peer into my bedroom window at night. So I could only sleep in rooms without windows or with blackout curtains. Because of that, I had a nightlight well into my early years. One day, my mom swapped out my old nightlight for this weird one that didn't have a regular bulb, but just glowed with this eerie bluish light. Honestly, I hated it. The shadows it cast were creepy, and I'd rather sleep in complete darkness than have it on. I even hid it so my mom wouldn't find it. One night, after Mom tucked me in and turned off the lights, I just turned over in bed when I noticed this blue glow on my headboard. I was annoyed, not scared, and got ready to yank that nightlight from the wall, assuming Mom had plugged it back in when I wasn't looking. But when I glanced over, the nightlight wasn't there. Instead, there was this floating ball of blue light, about the size of a softball, bobbing gently in the middle of my room. It looked like a tiny blue sun with a corona, but dim, like a phone screen. Up until then, everything was clear. I remembered Mom just left. I rolled over and then saw the glow. But right after that, my memories get all jumbled. The next thing I know, I'm screaming, face down in my pillow, completely terrified. Mom must have been right at the door because she came in looking half asleep with pillow lines on her face. She said I just had a bad dream, but honestly, I know it wasn't just a dream. I don't know what it was, but it stayed with me forever. You know, back in college, there was this girl I used to have a bit of a crush on. Let's call her Mia. She had this cool little crossover SUV, and we'd often hang out, chatting about all sorts of things while parked around campus. One night, we found ourselves parked under a big old oak tree in a pretty empty lot. It was dim, with only the campus lights flickering in the distance. As we were talking, Mia suddenly stopped mid-sentence and, sounding a bit panicked, asked if we could move somewhere else. In her rush to leave, she forgot to turn on her headlights, and we ended up getting pulled over by campus security for a moment. We finally parked near the main road where street lamps lit everything up nicely. Then she started switching the AC between warm and cold, back and forth, kind of ignoring me. Curious, I asked what she was up to. She said she was trying to fog up the windshield, but nothing happened. Then she pointed to the corner right in front of me, where there was a tiny footprint, about the size of a kid's, with 5 little toes and a full heel. I'll admit, I freaked out a little, thinking maybe she was playing a prank on me. I tried wiping it off, but the footprint was on the outside of the glass. We were both spooked. When I asked if that was why she'd hurried off earlier, she said no. She'd actually seen a small hand pressed firmly against the windshield. We just figured that parking lot had some sort of ghostly reputation. Fast forward a few years. I'd graduated and was working, and a buddy of mine had a pickup truck he used for work. One night, after grabbing dinner at a small ramen place, we hopped in his truck, and I noticed something familiar on the windshield. A tiny footprint again, only visible when the headlights from oncoming cars hit it just right. I told him to stay calm as I shared the story about Mia and that weird footprint. He got a little creeped out. This time, I tried wiping it off, and my finger brushed across dust that seemed to have gathered to form the shape of a tiny foot. It was like the dust itself had taken form. I started to get really unnerved, wondering if this thing was somehow following me. About a year later, I was at my girlfriend's house, which was tucked away in a quiet, gated neighborhood surrounded by woods. We had just finished watching this movie, The Shape of Water, which, by the way, I don't recommend watching with your partner's parents around. After the movie, we went upstairs to her room. As I was carrying her up the stairs, I stopped because something caught my eye. On the dust that had settled between the stair railings, there were 2 tiny footprints facing straight toward the couch where we'd been sitting. It looked like a little kid was standing there, watching us. What creeped me out even more was that there were no footprints leading up to or away from that spot. It just appeared there. I've never told my girlfriend about it because she gets scared easily, and I don't want her thinking her home is haunted or anything. But those little footprints? They seem to be a quiet reminder that some things are just a little beyond our understanding. Hey there. I want to share something that's been happening in my home lately, and honestly, it's been pretty unsettling. I'm Mia, and my boyfriend Liam and I live in his grandma's old house with our 3 big dogs. You know, those dogs that bark at just about everything? Yeah, them. It's a cozy spot, but the quiet country vibe has been shifting lately, especially with all the construction going on nearby. So, here's the thing. For about a month now, I've been hearing voices and noises that just don't seem to have a source. At first, I thought it was just me, maybe being tired from working night shifts as a nurse or Liam playing a prank. But it's gotten to a point where it's hard to ignore. One afternoon, while I was cleaning and blasting music, the dogs suddenly started barking at a guest room door. We barely use that room. It's more of a storage space for odd things. When I checked, there was nothing there. But then, I distinctly heard someone say, "Hey friend." I froze, looked around, but the house was empty and all windows shut. I even messaged Liam to see if he was trying to talk through our dog camera, but it was unplugged. Then, just last night, Liam was out with friends, and while I was feeding the dogs and taking out the trash, I heard a whistle followed by a "Hi." The dogs perked up and stared in the same direction. Feeling uneasy, I texted Liam, who told me to grab the dogs, head to our room, and get the shotgun ready until he got home. When he came back, he searched everywhere, but found nothing. There have been other little things, but these moments really shook me. I find myself retreating to our room, waiting for Liam, just trying to feel safe again. It's been a strange and scary experience, and I just wanted to share it with someone who might understand. I want to start by saying I've never really told this story before. Not properly. I've never written it out, never sat someone down and explained it. And honestly, part of me still doesn't like thinking about it too much. But this happened to me. I know how it sounds, and I know people are going to try to find normal explanations for it. I get that. I probably would too. But I'm telling this exactly the way I remember it. I was 10 years old when it happened. I'm 21 now. My parents split up when I was little, around 6. My dad stayed down in Tennessee for a while, and my mom took my sister and me back up to Minnesota so we could be closer to family. My dad had a rough few years after that. Drinking, pills, all of it. He's doing really well now, and I love him more than anything. But back then, things were complicated. When I was about 9, he moved back to Minnesota. My sister and I started staying with him a few nights a week. He was living with his parents at the time, in this old family house that had been passed down for generations. And when we stayed there, my sister and I slept downstairs in my great-grandmother Edna's old bedroom. She had passed away before I was born, but the room was still kept almost exactly the way she had left it. Nothing really changed. Her things were still there, her furniture, her decorations, and most of all, her dolls. There were dolls everywhere. Not just a few on a shelf. I mean, they surrounded the room. There was this high ledge that wrapped around the walls, above head level, and it was packed with them shoulder to shoulder. Most of them were old collectible dolls, the kind people used to take a lot of pride in collecting. Dawn dolls, Cabbage Patch Kids, and a bunch of others I didn't recognize. At first, my sister and I were scared of sleeping in there. I mean, we were kids. Being in a basement bedroom surrounded by old dolls is not exactly calming. But after a while, we got used to it. We reminded ourselves that they had belonged to our great-grandmother and that she had loved them. Thinking of it that way made it easier. It made the room feel less creepy and more like something sentimental. There was one doll, though, that always stood out to me. She was bigger than the others, maybe 1.5 feet tall, maybe closer to 2. She stood on the floor right beside the bed, near the nightstand. And, lucky me, she was on my side of the bed. My sister always slept on the inside, against the wall. I slept on the outside, right beside the open space of the room. The doll was close enough that if I turned my head on the pillow, I knew she was there. She wore a white dress with little flowers on it. Her face was always turned toward the bedroom door. Not toward the bed, not toward me, always toward the door. We slept in that room for months, and nothing strange happened. Not that I can remember. Eventually, it became normal. Until one night in the fall. If you've ever been in Minnesota in the fall, you know it already feels like winter is breathing down your neck. Everything is cold and gray, and the whole world feels quieter than it should. That day had been completely ordinary. My sister and I went to school, rode the bus to my dad's, played video games with him for a while, ate dinner, and went to bed. Nothing felt different at first, but I remember having trouble falling asleep. My sister and I were restless, tossing around, whispering about whether we should go wake up our dad and ask if he had anything to help us sleep. We decided not to. Eventually, I must have drifted off. Then I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was instantly awake. Not groggy, not half dreaming, fully awake. My heart was pounding, and I was sweating like crazy. I remember this horrible feeling in my body, like every nerve was warning me before my brain even understood why. Something was wrong. That's the only way I can explain it. Something in that room felt wrong. So I turned my head and looked around, and then I saw the doll. Her head was turned toward me, not slightly, not enough that I could tell myself I was imagining it. Her face was aimed directly at mine. That doll had always faced the door, always. But now her head was turned all the way to the side, lined up with me perfectly, staring at me with this blank, dead expression. I can still picture it, that little floral dress, that still body, that face looking right at me in the dark. The strangest part is that I didn't scream. I didn't wake my sister, I didn't run upstairs. I was terrified, but it was like my fear froze into something quiet. After maybe 30 seconds, I got out of bed, picked the doll up, put her in the closet, shut the door, and went back to bed. I know that probably sounds impossible, but I think I was more afraid of scaring my sister than anything else. She was younger, and the idea of waking her up and telling her what I saw felt worse somehow. So I kept it to myself. And that was it. The doll stayed in the closet after that. I never opened that closet again while we slept in that room. And before anyone says it was a prank, it wasn't. My dad wasn't even home that night. He was playing a gig out of state, and my grandparents had gone with him. My sister and I were supposed to get ourselves up for the bus in the morning, and my sister would never have done something like that. She wasn't that kind of kid. Even now, the thought of telling her makes me feel guilty, because I know she'd be furious that I never told her, and scared that she had slept through it. I never looked into my great-grandmother Edna's death. I never asked more questions about the room or the dolls. I just buried the whole thing as far down in my mind as I could. But I still think about it sometimes. That doll was facing the door when I went to sleep. And when I woke up, she was staring at me. Hey, I want to share this really unusual experience my family and I had during a recent getaway. We stayed at this newly renovated lakeside inn just a bit north of Houston, Texas. Our room was pretty spacious, with a master bedroom for my wife and me, and a separate sitting area with a pull-out couch for our 2 kids. The floor was covered with these vinyl planks that looked like wood, but they made this very distinct clicking and peeling sound when you walked on them barefoot. So, on the first night, I woke up super early, like 5:30 a.m., way before the sun was up. I heard what sounded like our kids whispering softly in the other room. At the same time, I heard what I thought were 2 pairs of feet quietly pacing near our bed. I braced myself, expecting some kind of playful prank. I sat up quickly, ready to catch them, but the room was pitch dark and completely empty. I could feel my heart racing, and then the whispering just stopped suddenly. I lay back down, still half asleep, and glanced at the alarm clock. Way too early for our kids, especially on vacation. So I got up to use the bathroom, and to my surprise, the kids were fast asleep. While I was in there, my mind started racing. I remembered that odd clicking sound from the floor and those whispering voices. Was I dreaming? Then this unsettling thought hit me. What if someone had actually gotten into our room? And what if they were still there? I opened the bathroom door and let some light spill into the bedroom, looking carefully around. Nothing seemed out of place, no signs anyone had broken in. My wife grumbled a bit about the light, so I turned it off, tried to calm down, and settled back into bed with my back facing the room. Then, suddenly, I felt a firm tap on the pillow right behind my head, like someone flicked it. I was completely spooked and ended up curling up against my wife like a scared kid, with goosebumps running all over me. I told her what happened, and she shared something strange too. She said she'd heard whispering from the kids' room around 3:30 a.m., and even asked them why they were still awake and told them to be quiet. But when she didn't get a reply, the whispering stopped. She said it didn't really sound like our kids, but it was definitely coming from their room and felt kind of mischievous. I got up again, turned on all the lights, and did a thorough search. Under the beds, inside the closets, behind curtains. Nothing. The kids just kept sleeping through all the noise. It took us a while to settle down after that. I told my wife it felt like someone had been in our room but vanished without a trace. We thought of a bunch of explanations but couldn't come up with anything that made sense. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, and I've never had an experience like this before in my life. Whatever it was definitely strange. Hey there, I want to share a story from about 20 years ago when I was in my early 20s. Back then, I worked as a window covering installer in Sacramento, California. One day, I was sent out with a big load of metal mini blinds to a busy veterans hospital just off Highway 50. When I arrived, I met the lead maintenance guy. He was super kind and lent me a rolling cart to make hauling my stuff way easier. He then guided me through a maze of hallways and up a big service elevator. When we stepped out, I was met with a completely empty hospital wing. I was honestly relieved to see that I had the whole floor to myself. No patients, no staff, no furniture blocking my way. It meant I could work quickly without any interruptions. The maintenance man explained they had just finished some seismic retrofits, pointing to some fresh drywall columns that masked most of their work. They took the chance to do some cosmetic fixes, install new blinds, and give the place a fresh coat of paint. He showed me a typical patient room and mentioned that there should be one blind for every window on the floor. Then he said he'd leave me to it and to call if I needed anything or when I was ready to head out. Just before he got on the elevator, he asked in this concerned, almost fatherly way, "You sure you're going to be all right up here?" I replied with my best confident young man's voice, "Absolutely." After a friendly handshake, he left, and as the elevator doors closed, his question echoed in my mind. Standing there, I really took in my surroundings. I was in the middle of a long rectangular room. On my left, bright and airy patient rooms lined the perimeter. But to my right, the light quickly faded into a dense, black corridor shaped like a U. The corridor twisted back around to where I was standing. Despite the fresh paint, the place felt like it was stuck in the 1950s. There were those pea-green ceramic walls and matching asbestos floor tiles. That's when it hit me. This place was seriously creepy. But I had a job to do, so I got to work. First, I walked the whole perimeter to get a lay of the land, peeking into each room as I went. When I reached the dark hallway, my courage started to waver. With no light, I figured there probably weren't any windows there to cover, but I pushed on to be thorough. As I stepped into the darkness, it felt like someone zipped an electric current through me. I'd never felt energy like that before or since, and it made me pick up my pace. On both sides of the corridor were pitch-black rooms. After peering into one, I decided not to explore any further. I was pretty sure I didn't want to encounter whatever was lurking in there. I ended up running back to the main hall as fast as I could. Luckily, only one room in that dark corridor had a window needing a blind. While working there, I felt like 1,000 eyes were on me, so I kept my gaze fixed on the doorway until I finished. For the rest of the time on that floor, I stayed on edge. The further I got from the dark corridor, the more relaxed I felt, but I kept hearing footsteps, bangs, knocks, the sound of a bucket sliding across the floor, muffled voices, and even an old-school intercom crackling like something from a vintage movie. And I'm telling you, I was 100% sure these sounds were coming from right there on that empty wing. Every time I heard something, I'd peek out into the hall or call out, "Hello?" in what I'm sure was a shaky voice. Halfway through, I finally stopped reacting to the noises, until I heard, "Hey, Kale!" That was the maintenance man, and man, was I relieved to see him. He asked how things were going and if anything weird had happened. Not wanting to sound crazy, I hesitated, but then mentioned some of the noises. He just laughed and said, "No joke, this place is haunted as heck. I wouldn't work up here alone." He told me the hospital had been an active war hospital since the 1940s, and that thousands of people had died in the operating rooms lining that dark corridor. He also mentioned that an electrician had quit earlier that week after something had run up behind him and growled. We shared a few laughs to break the tension, and then he left me to finish up. The rest of the day was surprisingly quiet, and I started to feel more at ease. But I remember feeling so relieved to leave that place when it was all done, and completely wiped out, crashing early that night. Even today, that experience stands as the strangest and eeriest I've ever had.